March 6, 1944. Over the Elbe River, 27,000 feet. Frost feathers cling to the inner edge of a Mustang's plexiglass as Lieutenant Jack Reeves Reynolds, 357th Fighter Group Blue Flight, rocks his wings to keep station above the shimmering bomber stream. The air is knife-cold and loud with the steady, high-pitched snarl of a Packard-built Merlin V1650-7 turning 3,000 RPM. Out front, the contrails of hundreds of B-17s and B-24s anvil the sky into white roads that all point east toward Berlin. Fuel sloshes in the 108-gallon paper drop tanks beneath his wings. The smell of high octane lingers in the mask. The call comes thin and crackly on the SCR-522. Blue leader, Darky Control, bandits climbing 200 degrees, Angels 25. Make your altitude. Berlin is ahead, black and hard on the horizon, and the old rule that escorts peel off at the German border has already been broken twice today. Below and to the right, Reynolds sees what the bombers see. Stout fortresses and combat boxes, chin turrets swinging like vigilant eyes, liberators shimmering with daylight and ice. He flies a weaving guard pattern just high and off the right wing of the lead squadron. Close escort, then out and ahead to sweep. Because General Jimmy Doolittle's new directive from January is gospel now. Don't just sit on the bombers, go after the Luftwaffe and break it. To the south, another weave of silver flashes catches the sun. The Debden boys of the 4th Fighter Group, Don Blakesley's outfit, spreading wide like wolves at the edges of the herd. Somewhere higher still, a P-47 element from the 56th has checked in for the ride home leg, heavy and murderous with 850s. But for the deep run, this is the Mustang's day. Blue Flight, tank check. Reynolds pats the selector with a gloved finger. External left. He keeps it there a breath longer. Every minute on the drops is minutes they won't have to scrounge later. He glances down through the struts and sees an Elba bridge slide by like a piece on a game board. Berlin's flak rings are already awake. Out ahead, ink-black puffs bruise the sky in precise, marching salvos. The fortresses don't flinch. Their course is iron. Blue 2, tally, 2 o'clock high, 6 bandits diving. The shapes carve out of sun glare. Dark, squared wings. FW-190As with bellies full of 20 millimeters, coming in a beam for a slashing pass at the high squadron. Behind them, dots that will grow into BF-109Gs, some fat with gondola gun pods for straight-through kill. For months, the Jagdwaffe's rhythm has been the same. Wait for the escorts to turn back, then eat the bombers. But the escorts haven't turned. Not today. Jettison! Jettison! Reynolds thumbs the release. The tanks kick free and tumble, white gloss cylinders suddenly weightless. He rams the throttle forward, 61 inches of manifold pressure. Feels the Merlins surge through his boots, the big foreblade biting harder. The Mustang stands on its tail. The 6 M2 Brownings in his wings are silent predators awaiting the signal. He rolls inverted, dives a sliver to build smash, and pulls through into the German element's wake. The reflector sights amber circle steady against the flashing world. The radio is a fever of clipped voices. Break right! Break right! He's on you 2! Splash 1, smoking, he bails! A 190 flashes past with a yellow engine ring and black crosses fat as door frames. Reynolds leads the target's nose, not the tail. Doolittle's hunters go for the head, for the trigger finger. He squeezes. The Mustang shudders. Tracers stitch a searing line that walks from wing root to cockpit. Metal peels back. The 190 folds, tumbles, and spits its pilot out in a gray-green splash of silk. Blue lead, I have one. Blue 3 is breathing hard, breath crackling through a frozen mic. 2 more crossing high, left to right. The bomber stream plows on with implacable purpose. Below Reynolds' right wing, a B-17G of the 91st Bomb Group, Bassingbourn, takes a burst through the starboard inboard engine. Fire blooms. The ship slides out, then, miracle, feathered, holds. A P-51 drops with it, wings wagging, the world narrowing to a helpless orbit around one wounded aircraft. Another part of the sky, another calculus. Across the formation, a 4th Group section rakes a climbing pair of Me-410s before they can settle into a head-on gun pass. The heavy twin engines light up like blown glass and fall in ugly arcs. Over Wittenberge, the flak gets heavier. The black bursts are larger, timed closer. A professional hand is on the predictor. Flak 2 o'clock, 25,000. Watch it. Even up here, you can smell it. A bitter chemical tang that the oxygen mask only half banishes. The bombers tighten. Reynolds eases out and up, just a little, into the fighter suite posture that makes Luftwaffe controllers curse, hunting for the climbing rot that always lurks on the edges, hoping to pounce on a laggard. He wants them to see the silver crosses of the Mustangs and know we are still here. In a Staffel ready room at Jüterbog that morning, a young lieutenant had jabbed a finger at the map and smirked. The Americans can't hold escort to Berlin. Not the whole way. The Engländer at night, yeah. But these Mustangs? Paper tanks? They will freeze and fall off. On the field, ground crews had stenciled black kill markings beneath the cockpits of FW190s with confidence born of years of success. The rhythm of interception was a comfort. Scramble, climb into sun, fix the contrail columns, wait for the gray escort ribbon to thin and snap, and then dive like butchers at the meat. That rhythm dies hard. Over Brandenburg, it dies today. Berlin flak is up, Control says, as if the city itself rises on a hinge. The haze turns brown. In the distance, sunlight flashes off the broad face of a flak term, one of the concrete castles that guard the capital with tiers of 128mm guns. The mission sheets have targets at Oranienburg, at Erkner, at aircraft works in the northeast clusters, and secondary targets if the winds are wrong. The forts turn into the wind as one, their bomb bay doors yawning open like red mouths. Blue flight, nose forward, we're sweeping the run-in. Reynolds feels the Mustang's shoulders, elegant wings drinking the thin air, answer with feline grace. There is a 109 climbing, late and desperate, on his 12, small, a little crooked, like a hook in the sky. He meets it head-on in a flash of mutual daring and out of playing yanks the Mustang across the German pilot's turn. The sight's ring floats, amber and calm, across that pale gray fuselage. He squeezes again. The 109 flares into a fan of fragments that twinkle and go out. He knows, in the tendon-deep way that fighting men do, that something is shifted. The bombers do not look naked. He's seen the photographs of Schweinfurt and Regensburg, heard the counting of empty bunks after missions when escorts had to turn back. But today, over the heart of Germany, the fighters are still here, riding shotgun and hunting free. Over the interphone of a battered B-17, some waist gunner's voice shakes with a disbelieving laugh. Jesus, look at those little friends. They're still with us. Bombs fall. The city moves under them like a living thing writhing in smoke and sirens. Under the parachutes of jelly orange flares, you can see the geometry of war. Box patterns, lead and deputy lead, formations sliding into and out of flak like schools of fish through coral. In a rail yard, explosions march down a siding into a sheet of flame. Beyond it, an aircraft plant fractures into glass and fire. The flak answers, vicious and endless, but it cannot shoo the steel clouds away. Above, Mustangs scissor and roll, a lattice work of protection and pursuit. Over Berlin's eastern edge, a German pilot pulls through a climbing turn, face slick with sweat inside the oxygen mask, and radios a controller whose voice has lost that morning's buoyancy. They are still there, the pilot says, more to himself than to the ground, eyes fixed on a silver shape angling in again. Sie sind noch da. He had believed in mathematics, their mathematics, of fuel, of range, of escort arcs that ended somewhere over the Ruhr. Mathematics is supposed to be trustworthy. It has failed him today. Reynolds steals a glance at the fuel gauges now that the drop tanks are gone. Enough for the turn, the fight out, and the long glide toward the channel if the winds are kind. He'll nurse it on the way home if he has to, throttle pulled back to a whispering cruise. But for now, the fight still clinches this piece of sky. Blue flight, tally 2 more, 11 o'clock, high, rolling in. He feels the war narrow to a trigger stroke, widen to the scale of a continent, then narrow again to the shape inside his sight. Later, at an 8th Air Force interrogation center in England, German prisoners, flak gunners, crashed pilots, men with winter still in their bones, will shake their heads and tell their captors the thing that flabbergasted them most. The American fighters came all the way to Berlin and then turned for home with the bombers, still picking fights. They will say it with a flatness that is half grudging respect and half the dawning dread of a professional watching his trade become untenable. They had counted on physics. The Mustangs had changed the math. For now, on the far edge of the bomb run, Reynolds tucks in above a straggling fortress, wingtip rocking, and catches a flicker of movement to the right. Another 190, angling in low, trying to pick the lamb from the flock. The Mustang rolls, dives, and the 6 guns speak again, long enough to carve a bright V into the cold noon air. Somewhere below, bells are ringing in a city ablaze. Somewhere to the west, the North Sea is a sheet of hammered pewter, and the sun is leaning toward it. The war, for one breath, seems to tilt just a fraction toward possibility. Berlin, March 6, 1944. The bomb doors close like iron eyelids, and the formation eases a few degrees to the west, starting the long, curving egress that will drag the whole procession back through the flak belts and fighter ambushes toward the North Sea. Lieutenant Jack Reeves Reynolds rides the top cover to a squadron of B-17Gs that's lost a few ships to oil and fire. The air tastes of cordite even through rubber. His oxygen mask is cold and stiff against his cheekbones. He drags a gloved knuckle across the N9 reflector gun sight and finds his place again in the silver lattice of Mustangs. Blue lead control, heavy buildup, fighters reforming northwest of the city. Altitude 27 to 28. Expect head-ons if they can make it. The voice is steady, clipped, trying not to sound like a prayer. Below, Berlin mutters through its smoke. You can see the bruised dark mass of a flak torm shouldering above the city's rooftops. Batteries slamming skyward in orderly fury. Between bursts, a rail yard flares like a wound. Reynolds checks fuel, drops gone. Mains sitting where they should. And thinks in miles and minutes, in oxygen and oil temps, in the fine arithmetic of getting home with just enough left to climb over a cloud bank if weather closes the coast. They come out of the sun again, but not as cleanly as before. A mixed pack in loose 3-ship Rottenführer knots, FW-190As heavy with cannon, and a few BF-109 G6s with bulged cowlings, some sporting underwing gondola guns. They don't wait for the escorts to peel and thin because the escorts haven't peeled and thinned. They try a head-on across the bomber nose, a screening pass designed to split a box and leave a fortress naked. But the 4th Fighter Group, spread wide and high, is already stooping on them, slashing across the German climb in a bright X of contrails. Blue, hold high cover, let Debden scythe the head-ons. Reynolds feels the tug of the hunt, but keeps station. The lesson is written in ash and aluminum. Don't get greedy and leave your sheep for wolves. Even Doolittle's new doctrine, seek and destroy the Jagdwaffe, has a cadence to it. There's a weave, a handoff, a timing to when you break forward and when you sit tight and show teeth. A 190 knives across the top of a high squadron, rolls hard right, and dives into the gap between the low and middle boxes where the stagger is thinnest. Reynolds meets the move with a smooth quarter roll, drops his nose just enough to pick up speed, and lines the sight's amber ring above the German's canopy. The Merlin howls. The Mustang's wingtips tremble with the shove. He squeezes in a long, disciplined burst. Tracers crawl into the 190's root, and the fighter shudders, pops panels, and vomits glycol. The canopy flips. A pilot tumbles clear. A doll yanked by invisible string. The fighter sides into the gray below. Blue 1, splash. No exultation, just breath, clipped, like a runner keeping pace. Watcher high five, pair of 9s, climbing. Pliss, scene. Blue 2 pushes up the left side, covers the quarter, and the weave clicks back into its rhythm. Off to starboard, a P-51 flashes past with nose art too quick to read and a bright yellow rudder. One of the 361st perhaps, chasing a 109 downward in a tightening spiral that seems to punch a hole through the sky itself. A B-17 in the low squadron, olive drab faded to brown, and the name Miss Beth chipped under the cheek gun, coughs smoke from number 3 and drifts right, a sheep nosing the edge of the flock. Reynolds dips a wingtip until the fortress fills his canopy, so close he can count the rivets around the chin turret. The right waist gunner is a blur of thick gloves and a steel pot. He looks up, sees the Mustang hanging there, and raises a thumb. 1, 2, like a kid signaling across a busy street. The fortress holds, stubborn as a mule. The flak changes texture around Eberswalde. Closer, heavier, the bursts freckled with jagged metal that clangs off fuselage skins. Flak, 2 o'clock, 26,000, Blue 3 calls, voice flattened by oxygen and fear. They tighten their weave, noses dipping, then rising in patient arcs, unwilling to risk a straight line through a predictor's solution. The forts behind them open a hair of spacing and then sew it up again as the barrage shifts. Debden red, tally 3, rolling. That's Blakesley's boys again, strafing the leading edge of a 190 swarm that finally committed to the egress curve. A German breaks too late and gets hung in the seam between groups. He dives, panic steep, right across Reynolds' bow. Instinct wants a snapshot. Doctrine says hold your altitude, don't chase into flak. He holds. The German plunges into a black blossom and comes out without a tail. Blue lead, we're being shadowed, high 3. Blue 4's voice is calm, the voice of someone reciting a checklist with a beating heart. Single 109, maybe a recce, maybe a late pounce. Put a scare into him. Reynolds eases his Mustang outward and upward, never more than a few hundred feet off the bomber's crown. The 109 grows from seed to thorn to blade. He counts a beat and then kicks a shallow climbing turn across its path, no more than a promise. The German rocks his wings, abandons the angle, and slides back into a litter of contrails, waiting for a mistake that doesn't come. They cross west of Finnow. In that thin blue above the fields and woods, airfields show as geometry, neat strips, revetments like teeth, flare paths, black scars where fire found something that wanted to burn. Under them, a staffel of 109s taxi in jerks, cloaked by smoke and the desperate efficiency of men who have measured the day and found it short. Far ahead, a 4th group element drops a pair of Mustangs into a low strafing run on a dispersal line and jumps 2 fighters just lifting off, carving through prop wash and dust with the arrogant grace of the unchallenged. The VHF crackles with warnings about flak from every barn and tree line. Reynolds files the temptation away, follows the bomber stream's broad turn, and listens to his fuel, to the engine's note, to the way the sky feels in his hands. Miss Beth, maintain course, escort with you. He says it out loud, though they can't hear him on the interphone. It's for him as much as for them. The Fortress edges back toward the formation like a drunk finding the curb. Her right waist gunner, maybe the same kid, maybe not, keeps his gun canted high, searching the contrail fences for a wolf. Over the radio, a different voice, older, worn down to the grain by cold and by death counts. One ship bailing out over Oranienburg, 2 shoots, flak heavy, watch that black. Beyond the words, a sound the 8th has learned to recognize, a certain softness when a man is counting other men falling. The egress becomes a long arithmetic problem with 100,000 moving parts and the answer printed at the bottom in saltwater and English fields. Reynolds feels the fatigue in his forearms and shoulders, held taut too long. He works them against the fur-collared jacket and the parachute harness, keeps the blood alive in his fingers with small squeezes. He's been at war long enough to know how quickly exhilaration leans into exhaustion, and then into the small mistakes that kill you. Blue lead, control. Multiple raids reporting weather closing across the channel, cloud base lowering. The sentence lands like a tax. The North Sea, indifferent and metallic, will have the last word if fog sits down on East Anglia. They pass the last clean wall of flak west of the city, and the sky opens into that blue so cold it looks brittle. The Luftwaffe makes one more try, working up from below in a textbook climb into the bomber's blind spot, hoping for a late meal. A section from the 307th drops in from above and meets them at the seam. Reynolds watches the fight from the corner of his eye. Silhouettes turn to aircraft, aircraft to streaks, streaks to nothing, and then rechecks fuel and leans his mixture according to habit and a superstition that feels like science. Berlin shrinks behind them, then the smoke is just a smudge, and the city is only a pattern on the map folded under his kneeboard. The radio fills with the hypnosis of navigation. Vectors, heights, the patient English accents of controllers whose war is made of triangles and numbers. Somewhere below, a German pilot hangs in a parachute above a winter field, spinning slowly to watch the Contrail River run west, and he says, nobody hears him, "Sie gehen nicht weg." They do not go away. 2 hours later, East Anglia. The coast appears through a lacework of cloud like something imagined first and then real. The bomber stream loosens, carefully, by plan, into squadrons, then flights, then exhausted aircraft on individual descents toward names that now mean safety. Bassingbourn, Molesworth, Thorpe Abbotts. Leiston, 357's home, waits with a steel mat runway that looks too narrow from the sky and exactly right when your wheels kiss it. Reynolds joins the pattern on the downwind, slides the gear lever, white light 3, and feels the Mustang change shape into something willing to land. The flaps come out in segments. The nose kicks a hair. He corrects without thinking. The Merlin's note goes from keen to content. He checks fuel again, out of habit and because he wants the comfort of numbers. Enough to taxi to dispersal and still give a brief to intelligence about how many minutes on drop tanks before jettison, how long on mains, where the flak was thickest. The runway reels up, fills the world, and then is underneath, tire squeal brief and blessed. He holds the tail up a second longer than he needs to, then lets it settle. On the hard stand, ground crew swarm the Mustang, faces red with cold and adrenaline, hands black with oil and paint. Someone slaps the wing root, someone else looks straight through him and counts bullet holes and cordite stains. "How far'd you go, Lieutenant?" a crew chief asks, tone a mixture of pride and supervisory irritation. Reynolds pulls his mask down, tastes the day's first real air, and smiles with more teeth than warmth. "All the way," he says, and the words feel like a hinge swinging a door in the mind. The debrief room is warm and crowded. Maps cover one wall, thumbtacks marching across the continent in red and twine. Germany reduced to a geometry you can scold with a pointer. Intelligence officers in tweed and leather gloves not yet taken off ask gentle questions with sharp edges. Headings, heights, calibers, colors of nosebands. Did you see black and white spirals on the spinner? JG-11. Did they press head on? How many in the element? He answers in the clipped cadence of the fired out. 2 pairs, then a third late. 20mm heavy, yellow cowl ring on one, white tailband on another. A flak tower clear as a cliff face east of the river. A runner from operations leans in to murmur in an intel officer's ear. The man nods, then turns to the room. One of the captured pilots from today's show, shot down near the coast, told the interrogation people something interesting. He says it as if he's tossing a biscuit to a tired dog, but his eyes are bright. He said, quote, "We waited for you to turn back. You did not. We did not know what to do. The room goes quiet the way a forest goes quiet before snow. Men drink burned coffee, crack stiff fingers, and look at one another with the precise economy of fighters measuring a new slope in the ground they stand on. Outside, the light is already going. Inside, someone writes a line on a board under Today. Berlin. Escort complete. Reynolds stands and feels the day leave his legs. He thinks of the red-lit warmth and petrol stink of a flak term gallery, the way the sky looked when you put your head on its block, the fort he shadowed with the kid in the waist window, the way the bomb bay doors closed all at once. He thinks of the German in a parachute watching contrails. He doesn't think, not yet, of tomorrow. Leiston, Suffolk. Dusk crawls across the hard stands and the day's heat, such as it was, drains into the damp. The debrief map has fresh strings, fresh red pins, and a neat chalked line at the bottom. Berlin. Escort complete. Lieutenant Jack Reeves Reynolds signs his name to the intel form, prints his time on drop tanks and mains, lists where the flak walked, where the fighters came in. He writes FW190A, yellow cowl ring, JG expended, and the pencil breaks in his fingers. Someone passes him another. Outside, a crew chief hammers a bent panel flat with the heel of his hand, then stops and runs that hand across the Mustang's flank like a man smoothing a horse after a hard ride. Night is a canvas of blackout. No lights but the hooded glows that keep men from walking into prop arcs. In the mess, soup is hot and anonymous. Toast tastes like cardboard, the way food does when your nervous system is still in the sky. The talk is low, ricocheting between lockers and mugs. Somebody says Debden's Blakesley is going to drag his boys across Germany until the props shave the church spires. Somebody else says the Germans will adjust, that nothing stays easy. No one says the thing they all felt when the bomb bay doors closed over Berlin with the Mustang still above them. A hinge moved. Something opened. Dawn, 2 days later, March 8, 1944. The briefing room hums with the sound of wool and leather and 100 men breathing through coffee. The curtain lifts, the target wheel clicks, and there it is again, almost like a dare. Berlin. The colonel taps the map with a pointer and the twine jerks across England, North Sea, the Frisian Islands, then east and deeper. Expect heavy flak here, tap tap, and here. Fighters forming areas, a circle scribbled near Stendal, another by Wittenberg. Escort plan, Mustangs high and wide on the ingress, close cover on the run. At the IP, you're cleared to hunt beyond the stream. Repeat, don't sit on the boxes if you can cut their climb and break them up. Doolittle's orders stand. Reynolds runs his thumb over the edge of his kneeboard and thinks about fuel in columns and minutes on paper. The supply officer mentions the oddity everyone jokes about but loves. 108-gallon paper tanks, laminated and glued, perfect because they're light and cheap and don't mind being tossed into the North German mud. Use them hard, boys, the supply man says. We've got more. They taxi in a line that snakes along the perimeter track, tail wheels chirping, wingtip to wingtip. Helmets bumping the frames of framed canopies that still smell of dope and paint. The Merlin V1650-7 is a civilized animal at idle and a carnivore when you open its throat. Wheels up, gear clunks into the wells, and they go climbing into that pale morning like a school of silver fish committing the ancient sin of flying. Darky, blue lead, Angels 27 and building, formed on the second box left of lead. The bomber stream shows itself as a series of stacked cities, B-17G chin turrets blinking in motion, B-24 noses like greenhouses, contrails thrown in zigzags by wind shears no one can see. Somewhere to port, the fourth group spreads its wings in a long arc, hunters on the flank. Behind, a jug element checks in, tasked with seeing the bombers through the last leg home. For the deep, the lean P-51s go first and stay longest. On the German side, the morning is a clatter of cups and a scramble bell. Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Mertens, last seen by any American as a figure tumbling from a gray 109, sits now, uninjured but rattled, on a narrow bench in a dispersal hut near Verneuchen. He has a fresh aircraft. He has the old faith in mathematics. He also has a new word in his mouth that tastes foreign. Mustangs. His Staffelkapitän jabs a map with a pencil until the paper tears. You wait for the escorts to fold. They always fold. You hit the bombers when they are naked. You work in pairs, not threes. No heroics. Head-ons and out. Remember the rockets. The ordnance crew roll out 21-centimeter underwing tubes for a pair of 109s, hoping to cough a hole in a combat box. Across the field, 190s with belly armor and cannon belts clatter to life, coughing smoke. Over the Elbe again, the sky goes from quiet to knives in the space of one breath. Blue lead, darky control, bandits forming to your 2 o'clock, high, multiple. Debden is posting above you at Angels 3-2. Reynolds' hand sits lightly on the throttle. He wants the edge, not the red line. He wants to arrive at the fight before the German pilot finishes his thought. The first pass comes head-on and misses its own rhythm. A 190 drags a line of tracers across the nose of a high squadron, and the whole box answers with 50 caliber contempt. A strange, beautiful geometry of reciprocated violence. The German kicks out, rolls, tries to fall under, and runs into a pair of Mustangs whose pilots look like cranes stooping for fish. The sky fills with the small domestic details of war. A puff of cotton where a parachute leaves a cockpit. A strip of fabric unspooling from a wing like a ribbon. A chunk of metal ringing off someone's underside with a clean bell note you can hear even with oxygen pushing into your face. Blue, jettison. Drop tanks bang away like loose teeth. The Mustangs step on their own shadows and go forward. Reynolds slides out and up for a sweep, eyes scouring the contrail fences for the climb that always precedes the bite. There, 2 109s working a patient ladder up the side of the stream. Black crosses fat, canopies catching sun. He cuts across their angle, nose low, and the world comes into that bright, quiet tunnel the mind finds when the body is busy saving itself. He picks the second man, always the second, and leads just enough to paint the canopy in amber light. When he squeezes, the guns speak in a braided tone he now knows the way you know a friend's voice. and the 109 staggers, loses its breath, and tips. The first German, not Mertens, pitches hard into a vertical and then peels off. Too fast to catch before Flak would own the both of them. Reynolds lets him go because the doctrine and the gut agree for once. The bomber stream still needs its shadows. On the radio, a different tempo. Targets in sight, bomb bay doors. Steady, steady, bombs away. The words are almost whispered. The sky turns thick with puffs again. Clockwork flowers that open at exact heights chosen by men with slide rules and a long hatred. Miss Beth is in there somewhere, grim as a mule, and Reynolds holds the top cover like a roof over a porch. The Luftwaffe changes the play mid-act. From below, fast and late, a swarm claws up for the seam between boxes. Their timing is nearly perfect. It would have been perfect last winter, but the weave of escorts never thins now. A fourth group element drops from above them like a man throwing a coat over a candle. Two Germans break off, startled. The others commit and are met by the hot, indiscriminate weather of 8 50 caliber guns each. A 190 punches through with holes big enough to read a poster through and keeps going. Defiance and momentum mixed in its oily wake. On the ground, in Berlin's command bunker for the Flak, a major in a rumpled tunic leans over a plotting table and listens to a chain of batteries report with the sudden, brittle speed of men who know when they are behind. Feuerstoß 3, jetzt! A ladder of black explosions climbs and then leaps west to meet the curve of the egress. It is professional work. It kills, it does not clear the sky. After the run, the stream flexes. The Mustangs slip wide again, fingers combing the air for the last ambush. Blue lead, fuel state. Reynolds glances at the gauges. Enough. Not generous. He sends 2 to lean out and climb, 2 to sit close. Blue 4, take high cover, he says, and Blue 4's voice, cool, younger than it sounds, answers. Roger, high and right. They cross west of the city's bruise into open blue so clear it rings. There's a flash above, a silver shape with a yellow rudder, 361st. And then a 109 pours over the top for a desperate snapdown that would be beautiful if it weren't murderous. Reynolds throws the Mustang up into it, no more than a defensive check, and watches the German overshoot out of ideas. You can feel it when an enemy runs out of ideas. It has a weight, a small tilt in the air. By then, the channel is a promise written in light. The controllers back in England talk in long triangles. Leiston, Vector 085, Angels 10 for approach. Weather is a moodier actor today. Low cloud smears the coast. Reynolds leans the mixture just enough and rides the descent all the way to the break, oxygen taste giving way to the honest wet of East Anglia. On the ground again, wheels chirp, tail settles, taxi light flickers under its blackout hood. The crew chief counts holes with a finger. You keep bringing her back, sir. I'll keep making her pretty. Reynolds scrubs a glove across the canopy rail and says, without meaning to, we keep going back, they keep running out of fighters. It sounds too easy aloud. He knows it isn't. At debrief, there's more than coffee. There's a quiet, stunned rumor moving along the wall like a draft. A pilot from another group heard it from an interrogator who heard it from a German prisoner plucked off a North Sea lifeboat. We waited for the escort to turn. It did not. We could not get through. The intel officer writes it on the chalkboard under claims, as if it were another tally. They waited. We did not turn. If you are watching this scene, this room of men in oil-stained wool, you can feel the war's grain change under your fingers. You can feel a doctrine harden. The P-51s drop tanks clatter in a salvager's yard somewhere near Bremen. The Flakturms have fresh chips in their concrete and will have more. The Jagdwaffe fills another blackboard with losses and pins another map with names in black for men who will not push open the ready room door at the next bell. Night comes heavy. Reynolds lies on a narrow bunk in a Nissen hut that creaks with the slow thermal of cooling metal, and he hears the field in his bones. The far-off cough of a test run, the clink of a fuel can, the laugh that starts and dies in a throat because someone remembered why it isn't funny. He sees contrails over Berlin when he closes his eyes. He hears, with a clarity that feels like guilt, the German's quiet sentence from the lifeboat. Morning is a rumor waiting to become a briefing. The map wheel will turn, the twine will jerk, and if it isn't Berlin, it will be Leipzig or Erfurt or Schweinfurt again, the old names with new mathematics. The little friends will go where the big friends go, and further if the doctrine demands it. That's the job now, not just to accompany, but to hunt, to pull the claws from the animal at its shoulder and then escort it home. Leiston, March 13th, 1944. The Nissen hut smells of damp wool and pencil shavings. A potbelly stove ticks like a cooling engine. The pilots sit in 2 rows with their harnesses half buckled already, as if they might sprint from the brief straight into the cockpits. The curtain jerks, the wheel turns, and the pointer wraps the map. Leipzig. Messerschmitt works at Erla. The route ribbon. Out across Cromer, Zuiderzee, Brunswick, into the initial point. Makes a quiet S across northern Germany. The operations officer looks up and says the sentence that still feels like contraband even after a month of hearing it. General Doolittle's directive holds. On the run-in and the egress, if you can break up their climbs, you are cleared to hunt. Do not be predictable. Do not sit where the enemy expects you. Jack Reeves Reynolds writes the words "hunt high right" in his kneeboard margin, underlining twice, because that's where the Germans have been starting their ladders, above the bomber stream's crown, timing their dive for the head-on slice or the seam between boxes. He thinks about fuel first, always fuel. 2 108-gallon paper tanks hang under the wings this morning, their curved sides painted a dull institutional white. He has learned to love their ugliness. They are tickets to places a fighter has no business going. On the far side of the front, Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Mertens stands at Verneuchen in a line of pilots while their Staffelkapitän lays out today's plan with a cigarette as a pointer. Climb to 28 west of Dessau. We will not waste fuel on long climbs to the sun. Hold your line abreast. 2 ships carry Werfergranate 21. The ground crew muscle the black tubes under 2 Bf-109 G6 wings, slapping the pins in with the kind of practiced brutality that means they've done this often and recently. Someone jokes that the rockets make the airplanes fly like wagons. No one laughs very hard. Leiston's perimeter track is wet and reflective, a dull mirror that doubles the Mustangs as they taxi. The Packard-built Merlins are all business at 1200 RPM, tails light, wings twitching as prop wash curls across flaps and ailerons. Blue flight, run up. Magnetos checked, boost pumps on. You good too? Good. 3, green. 4, green is spring. Wheels roll, the runway strobes by. 80 knots. 100, tail up. The Mustang lifts into that cold English air with the skater's confidence. They climb into the Great Migration. B-17Gs and B-24s stacked like terraced cities, their contrails crosshatched by wind. Out on the flank, the 4th fighter group, Debden, spreads long and hungry. Above the far shoulder, a 352nd element shows blue noses like a row of toy soldiers. On VHF, control talks in vectors and angels. Multiple buildups vicinity Magdeburg to Wittenberg, angels 26 to 31. The tone says, expect them everywhere. Over the Aller, Ice makes insect maps on Reynolds' canopy. Blue, tank check, stay on your papers. He drains his left drop until the needle flutters, then flips the selector. The fuel math ticks behind his eyes. Minutes on external, minutes on main, contingency if weather lowers at base. He's already traded some of those minutes in imagination for the right to shove the throttle through the gate when the first 190 shows a belly full of cannon. The first intercept is old school, a head-on rush across the lead box. Jagdwaffe discipline against 8th Air Force geometry. 2 FW-190As rake out of the sun, their cannons thudding, and a B-17G in the high left element coughs smoke from number 2. Waist guns chatter with the petulant fury of people swatting wasps. Before the 190s can roll and fall away clean, Debden's top cover unrolls off the contrails with the grace of a silk ribbon falling off a table. Tracers stitch the sky into rules no one had to read. One 190 goes over on its back and comes apart in pieces big enough to name. Blue, jettison! Jettison! The 108s kick free and tumble, flashing white, then fall toward a German field where men will later cut them up for stovepipes. The Mustang feels immediately like an impatient idea. Reynolds slides out of his porch guard weave and tips the nose toward the seam ahead of the IP. "Blue lead, we're hunting," he says, and the words taste like a risk he has wanted to take since the first time he saw a fortress look naked. The climb comes into view exactly where he drew it. 2 BF-109s stepping up in that patient stairway along the stream's shoulder. He picks the wingman, always the wingman, drops 2 degrees below and outside their plane to complicate the German leader's look back, and then lets the Mustang speed right the next sentence. The reflector sight's amber ring, cleaned by a gloved knuckle a minute ago, floats over the 109's canopy like blessing and threat. He squeezes. 6 Brownings light, and the German airplane twitches as if someone has grabbed its spine. A panel lifts. Glycol vapor opens like a white flower. The 109 slides away, a man's work undone in a half second. "Brake! Brake! Rockets!" Blue 3's warning slices the frequency. Below the middle box, 2 stubby contrails rise like thrown javelins. The Werfer Granata 21s Mertens' Staffel has fired from too far out. They arc toward the fortresses in a slow, sick geometry that gives everyone time to watch. The rockets pass between 2 ships and burst in black puffs that look theatrical until the fragments slap Miss Beth's belly with a metallic hail. She holds. Her formation holds. The gap is small and then re-knit by habit. Mertens feels the airplane with the rockets fight him, the extra drag like a hand on the back of his neck. He thumbs the release toggles to clear the tubes and curses when the left one clings, a little tugboat of drag that will steal yards from every climb. He watches, with something like awe and a dawning anger, as the Mustangs leave the porch again and come for his stair step rather than shepherding, as the textbooks had taught. "Nicht normal," he says into his mask. Not normal. Reynolds watches a yellow-nosed 190 cut across the bomber's noses for a defiant slash and meet a wall of 50 caliber that looks almost solid in that cold light. The German goes through, shedding pieces, proud even now. Beyond him, the bomb bay doors gape and the stream transforms into a machine for making rectangles of ruin on the ground below. Flak answers like an argument made of numbers. "Blue lead, fuel state?" Blue 4's voice is too young for the distance they are from home. Reynolds glances, a ritual check, a prayer answered by needles. "Enough to fight out and still see the coast," he says. "Keep your height. We'll trade altitude for miles if we must." At the IP, with the bombers steadying for the run, he slides the flight outward and upward into that hunting weave Doolittle blessed. A 190 pair rising into the seam see him too late. He cuts a shallow oblique, touches them with a burst like a flicked whip, and leaves them scribbling contrails into the egress path with more fright than purpose. In the headset, different voices, different groups, all describing the same new world. "Escort high with you," "Still with you," "Fighters sweeping ahead." Words that, this winter, would have sounded like boasting, now land like weather reports. On the ground at Leipzig, a figure runs from a shelter with a clipboard to count bomb strikes with a numb rigor that bureaucracies demand even when the ceiling is falling in. Far overhead, Miss Beth shudders once as if shrugging off a hand, and then settles into the queue for the turn west. Reynolds floats above her again, a thin roof, and for a moment the war feels almost elegant. Machines keeping promises to other machines. The egress is a long curved threat. Mertens, in a lighter 109 now that one of his rocket tubes has torn free on its own, tries to time one last climb into the blind spot and feels something give in his certainty instead of the Mustang's line. The escorts do not thin. They do not go away. He takes the angle anyway. Pride demands it, and finds the muzzle flash of a 4th Group P-51 where he expected emptiness. He yanks, feels the heavy left wing confess its drag, sees a silver shape whip past with a blue nose and a pilot's head that never seems to move. He lives because the American does not chase. The American turns back to the stream like a sheepdog refusing rabbit. Reynolds sets the mixture back a hair, trims the nose to milk a mile from every gallon, and lets the Merlin sing that less excited note that means going home is possible. The radio turns into navigation and weather, altitudes that fit between cloud and coastline. The North Sea shows as hammered pewter again, then as a lighter smear, then simply as smell. Leiston in late afternoon is a gray promise that keeps itself. Wheels down, 3 greens, flaps to 40. He flattens the arrival with a touch of throttle, lets the tires hum, holds the tail up until the runway makes the decision for him, and taxis with the long, wary patience of a man who will not trust the ground until the switch is off. On dispersal, his crew chief runs a hand along the wing's leading edge and counts nicks with his thumb. "You're hunting more," the chief says, half pride, half complaint. "Orders," Reynolds answers, and the chief nods, because orders is a way of saying, "we might win." Debrief is brief and hungry. The intel officer with the tweed elbows writes "Hunt successful" on the board and circles it, then asks about colors and bands and whether anyone saw the black and white spirals of JG-11. Someone did. Someone always does. A runner arrives with a scrap of gossip from a prisoner cage in East Anglia. A German pilot, angry and exhausted, told his interrogator that their controllers no longer knew where to place the ambush points because the escorts no longer flew the old arcs. "They come where we climb," he said, as if describing a crime. In the hut, late, Reynolds lies awake long enough for the stove to go quiet. He can still feel the moment when the Mustang stopped being a porch light and became a torch carried into the dark places, because the policy now says, find the wolf and break its teeth. It is a change you do not notice until you wake one day and realize your hand rests on the throttle like on a lever that moves more than just your own airplane. Outside, the wind stirs the hardstands and lifts a paper tank that someone left leaning against a drum. It rolls a yard, wobbles, then settles with a gentle thump. Cheap, disposable, miraculous. In the morning they will hang 2 more. In the morning the map will gleam again. In the morning the hunters will leave the porch. March 18, 1944. Northeast of Magdeburg, 24,000 feet. The sky is a geometry problem written in contrails. Lieutenant Jack Reeves Reynolds sits just off the right shoulder of a fortress's high box as the stream bends toward Berlin for the second time in less than a fortnight. The cold has teeth. The Merlin V1650-7 hums a steady, civilized threat at 2,700 RPM. Boost trimmed to hold position without bleeding fuel. Under his wings, 2 new 108-gallon paper tanks bob in the slipstream, their white skins smudged by greasy glove prints from the line. Blue lead darky control, build-ups southwest, Stindl to Rothenau, Angels 25 to 30. Expect a head-on jab, then a climb for the seam. The controller's diction is chalk on slate precise. The first jab is textbook Jagdwaffe. 4 FW190As slice across the lead group's nose, 20mm thumping, then roll out and dive for a blind spot. Except there's no blind spot. Debden's top cover is already falling through them like thrown cutlery. Red-nosed Mustangs drawing bright stitches across gray wings. 190 holds straight through the wall of .50 caliber, arrogant and doomed. His canopy comes off as if plucked by a hand. Blue, jettison on my mark. Reynolds watches the needles twitch toward the point where external fuel stops being insurance and starts being a coffin. Mark. The 108s kick and tumble, clattering into the invisible step of air beyond the wing and then falling toward winter fields where, someday, someone will make a stove from American paper. On the other side of the sky, Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Mertens levels his Bf-109 G6 at 26,000, 2 finger widths under the bomber crown, and tastes leather and stale coffee through his oxygen mask. They gave him a fresh machine after the last one came home with a bad wing and a missing rocket tube. No Werfergranate today. He feels lighter, willing, the way a man does after he shrugs off a backpack he has carried too long. His Rotenführer calls the cadence of their patient ladder. Noch eine Stufe. Jetzt. Halten. One more step. Now, hold. They have a window. There is always a window, if they cut it clean. Blue 2, tally, 11 high, pair stepping up. Reynolds slips outward, trading a little height for speed, sight ring floating like a coin on oil. He picks the wingman because the leader is watching his mirrors. He picks the man who trusts the lead's eyes. The Mustang's long nose slides a hand's breadth ahead of the 109's canopy. He squeezes. The 6 Brownings speak with that braided growl he knows in his ribs now. A panel lifts. A white flower of glycol opens in the German's slipstream. The 109 slides away, obedient to gravity's oldest suggestion. Merton sees it a half-second late, the silver shape that wasn't there and then is, and flicks his stick left, then harder right, buying confusion if not advantage. He puts the sun between his eyes and the American, kicks rudder into a defensive skid that would make his instructor swear, and falls for a heartbeat as if he meant to. The Mustang does not chase. It climbs 2 lengths back to where the bombers are, where the money is, like a dog returning to the herd after nipping a wolf. The bomb bay doors yawn. The stream settles into that cruel calm that precedes the fall. Flak rises in staircase bursts, black blossoms opening at preordained heights in rows that look like handwriting. In a rail yard east of the city, a string of cars goes white at the edges, then red, then nothing. A factory roof ripples like tin under hail. Steady, steady, bombs! Voices crackle across VHF and then fall silent as if the words themselves might pull a ship offline. Mertens commits. Pride and math push him, and a sliver of anger at the way the escorts have been where he needs them to be. He sets his nose under the right-hand middle box, where 4/4 make a corridor of aluminum, and climbs into the seam, throttle hard against the stop, prop at fine pitch, the Daimler-Benz wailing a thin keen that vibrates in his molars. For 2 breaths he is in the pocket, perfect and deadly. He meets a wall, not of metal, of intention. 2 Mustangs from the 352nd, blue noses bright as bruises in the sun, drop a hand's breadth into his path. One angles across his turn line, not at him but through the space he needs to inhabit, like a door closing in his face. He drives at the gap anyway, because to do otherwise is to admit what the rumors from the ready room have been hinting. The window is shut. Blue lead, high 3! Blue 4's voice is suddenly child-young and calm. Reynolds reflexively checks the quadrant, clear, and returns his attention to the bomber crown. Below and forward, a B-17G named Miss Beth hitches as flak taps her belly. The waist gunner on the right side is a pair of gloved hands and a steel pot looking for something to shoot that isn't already falling apart. Mertens yanks, sees the blue-nosed P-51 fill his windscreen, and shoves the stick forward until the harness crushes his chest. The 109's tail buckles twice in light buffet. The Mustang flashes over his canopy, sunlight arcing along its wing root like a match struck and blown out. He inverts, drags a sloppy half roll to put the bombers behind him, then pulls. The world goes brown at the edges and the oxygen smells like metal. The headset crackles with someone else's panic, not his own. Brake! Brake! Then nothing. He tries to finish the roll, feels the stick go suddenly light, and looks out left. A neat row of holes, thumb-sized and edged in bright aluminum, runs from his wing root to the aileron. He did not feel the hit. You seldom do. The 109 hears it, though. In some way, a machine hears. A change in the wing's whisper. The roll goes lopsided. The ship wants to turn in one direction forever. Reynolds sees the 109 flatten into a slow, ugly drift. The disciplined part of his mind, the part Doolittle spoke to when he changed the rules, says, "Don't chase." The human part, made of target fixation and mercy and a hunger you don't name, pushes his nose a hair. He gives the German a short, mean burst across the tail, not to kill, but to insist, and then kicks away, back up where the forts cast their contrails in doubled lines. Mertens knows the arithmetic now. A long glide east means fields and friendly lines if he can make the distance. A parachute into Brandenburg means cold and a lecture. He looks at the fuel, the sky, the way the left wing whispers treachery, and chooses. He yanks the canopy release. It kicks and skitters somewhere behind him. The slipstream tries to take his head off. He finds the bar with fingers that have gone to wood and throws himself at the hole. The parachute opens with a punch that hauls a curse out of him. The 109 sides on without him, neat as a knife, and knifes into a field in a wingover that writes a shallow furrow into the winter wheat. For a long handful of seconds he spins gently above Germany, and hears a sound he cannot place until he names it. The carried hum of distant Merlins, still there, still overhead, still not leaving. On the ground, 2 men in black coats and a farmer with a pitchfork are the first to reach him. The farmer's dog barks at the parachute as if it were a beast. Mertens' ankle burns where he took the landing badly. He tries to stand and finds kindness in the wrong face. The farmer takes his elbow, says nothing, and walks him away from the twisted aluminum that was his morning's work.
Tally 11 high.
By dusk, he is in a Luftwaffe hospital barracks near Stendal. By midnight, he is on a train west with other flyers who are bored or boastful or silent according to the way their day went. By noon the next day, a staff captain reads his papers and puts him in a truck headed toward a coastal airfield where a twin-engined ambulance aircraft waits. He stares through a little round window as Europe slides under the wing. A Royal Navy ship looms where a line on a map becomes sea. The ambulance plane lands in England with a sulky bump, and the nurses who lift him to a stretcher smell of soap and wool. He sleeps. When he wakes, a man in tweed is sitting across a wooden table from him with a folder and a pencil and the gentle manner of a schoolmaster. "We will speak in English if that is comfortable," the man says. "I am Captain Hall." His accent has the rural flattening of East Anglia. "Your name?" Mertens gives it. It is a relief to surrender something the enemy already owns. "Unit?" "JG-11. He watches the pencil move. "Tell me about your climb, your controllers. And tell me, if you would be so kind, what you expected the American escort to do today." Mertens's mouth is dry. He looks at the water he has been offered, and at the pencil, and at the window that shows a hedgerow and a footpath and a sky that looks English in the way a cake looks English. "We expected—" He stops, embarrassed by the smallness of the word in his head. He tries again. "We expected them to turn." Captain Hall looks up. "Where?" "Before the city." Mertens lifts a hand and draws an invisible arc in the air. "They did not. They were above the bombers when the doors opened. They were above the bombers when we climbed for the seam. They were above the bombers after the egress. They were—" He gropes for something that isn't a complaint. "They were not reasonable." Hall's pencil pauses. "Not reasonable," he repeats, as if tucking the phrasing away for a report. "How many drop tanks did you observe jettisoned near the city?" "Many," Mertens says, and then, surprising himself, he laughs, short and humorless, "enough to build a cottage." In another room, the same hour, Reynolds sits on a wooden chair that squeaks, dictating to an intelligence sergeant who types too fast. "Color bands on tails. White for JG-11, sir?" the sergeant asks. "Yes," Reynolds says. "Blue nose is above us. 352nd. Intervened twice on our high 3. Very clean. Debden sived the first head on. Flak heavy over Rathenau. Black and accurate at 2-6. He stops and rubs the bridge of his nose where the oxygen mask has pressed a red trench. "Escort with the bombers all the way on the run," he says, mostly to himself. "We were there when the doors shut." Hull closes his folder on the other side of the field and stands. "Thank you, Lieutenant." He tucks the pencil behind his ear in a gesture that feels almost domestic. "You should know," he hesitates, then decides to say it, "that many of your countrymen have used the same word today. They found the persistence of the escort unreasonable." He smiles a winter-thin smile. "War is not a place for reasonable things." Outside, the day drains into English gray. A truck rattles by on the perimeter road piled with dented white cylinders that smell faintly of glue and petrol. A corporal shouts to a private to stack them by the fence. Tomorrow morning, men in oil-streaked coveralls will hoist 2 of them under the wings of Lieutenant Reynolds's P-51 and thump them home with a sledge's rubber face. Somewhere beyond sight, over a Germany that has begun to feel smaller from the air, a farmer sets a melted strip of aluminum against a shed and wonders what use he can make of it. March 24th, 1944. North of Hanover, 25,000 feet, noon light, brittle as glass. The bomber stream has learned the shape of Germany, and Germany has learned the sound of Mustangs. Lieutenant Jack Reeves Reynolds rides high cover off the right shoulder of a B-17 G-Box whose lead ship carries a white triangle with an A, 1st Bomb Division, sliding for Berlin again by a dogleg. His Merlin V-1650-7 purrs at 2,700 RPM, mixture leaned, props biting thin, hostile air. Under his wings, fresh 108-gallon paper tanks drum their hollow rhythm. Fuel is minutes, and minutes are life. Blue lead, darky control, the controller's voice comes across the SCR 522 in that schoolteacher cadence East Anglia lends to war. Multiple builds Hanover to Stendal. Expect coordinated head-on and underbelly climbs. Debden is high 3, Bodney high 9. The 4th fighter group is the long, hungry arc above the stream. The 352nd's blue noses sit like ornaments on the crown. The plan is written on the air. Mustangs close in on the run, then slip the leash to hunt where the climbs begin. They come as promised. 4 FW190As rake across the lead group, 20mm stitching smoke through a B-17's number 2. Before they can roll and fall clean, a Debden element drops through them like a guillotine made of light. 190 in 2 pieces before the sound catches up. From below, 2 BF-109G6s begin that patient ladder to the seam. Reynolds feels the moment the way a fisherman feels the weight of a strike. Nothing to see yet, everything to sense. Blue, tank check, stay on paper. He rides external fuel to the flutter, flips to mains, and waits one more breath than is comfortable. Mark, jettison. 2 white cylinders kick and tumble away, tomorrow's German stovepipes. On the other side of the sky, Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Mertens sits propped in a hospital cot, ankle wrapped, the window beyond the ward showing a hedgerow and the pallid, expensive sky of England. Captain Hall has moved him from the interrogation room to a quieter place where tea mugs sweat on saucers and words come easier. When the RAF nurse opens the window a crack, he can smell wet earth and coal. In the corridor, a sergeant passes with a clipboard. The war has a domestic face here that disorients him. "Do you hear it?" Hall asks, as if they've been sitting together in a church listening to an organist warm up. At first, Mertens hears only wind and the rattle of crockery. Then, faint but distinct, the carried saw-song of Merlins. He thinks of contrails making fences across a German noon, and of the way the escorts have begun to arrive at the exact place his instructors promised they would not. He doesn't answer. He doesn't need to. The noise writes its own report. Back over Hanover, Reynolds takes the seam like a craftsman. 2 109s stack in a tidy 2-ship, leader watchful, wingmen trusting. He steals 2 degrees of nose low for smash, slides outboard the thickness of a glove, and lets the amber ring of his N9 sight float over the wingman's canopy. Squeeze. The 6 Brownings speak in braided thunder. Aluminum peels, glycol blooms white. The 109 decides to be a glider. The leader yanks into sun and lives because Reynolds doesn't chase. Doctrine holds. Kill the climb, then go back to the money. Bomb doors, someone whispers across VHF, reverent as a psalm. The forts open like iron flowers. Flack answers in neat black handwriting, bursts stair-stepped at 26, 27, 28, a mathematics of hatred and precision. In the rail yard east of Spandau, explosions march down a siding until the maps inside somebody's head match the fire on the ground. The stream holds steady in that unnatural calm which is everything you need to know about discipline. Then the sentence Doolittle made possible arrives on the radio, not as drama, but as routine. Escort cleared to hunt on egress. Repeat, free to sweep and break up assembly areas north and west of the city. Airdrome targets of opportunity authorized. The words are the hinge you can feel in your palm. No one says them loudly. They don't have to. Reynolds keys. Blue copies. We'll keep a roof on the turn, then sweep. To starboard, a 352nd pair. Blue noses bright as bruises. Tilts its wings in acknowledgement and slides off to the high 3 to meet a late 190 swarm that is already too late. Debden goes long to the west, wide as a grin. The Jagdwaffe tries the old counter, 1 head on, 1 under, 1 late high, but the escort weave doesn't thin. Reynolds watches the last head-on break apart under 50 caliber weather and feels not triumph, but the click of a combination lock turning. On the ground near Wunstorf, a mechanic with oil to his wrists slaps the cowling of a BF-109 and shouts at a pilot to taxi. A 20mm flak-fearling coughs a square of black into the sky over the hedgerow. A row of 190s sits in revetments like sleeping dogs. Someone's bicycle leans against a drum of benzene. The war is banal until it isn't. "Blue, with me," Reynolds says, and drops his nose into a patient descending arc that bleeds altitude into speed without telling the flat gunners he's coming. The fields rise. Farmhouses turn from toys into houses. The perimeter track at the airdrome resolves into concrete, scuffed black where tires have kissed and lifted 1,000 times. He picks the long axis of the runway because that's where the 20mm will have the worst time leading him, and because that's where the sleeping dogs are. The first pass is a postcard of chaos. A 190 on the taxi line lurches, pilot half in, canopy open, a man on the wing slapping the cowling as if scolding a mule. Reynolds puts the amber ring a palm's width ahead of the spinner and touches the trigger. The Mustang's nose twitches, only a little, only enough, and the tracer line walks through the prop arc and into the engine face. The 190 hunches, coughs, and takes fire with the sickening, beautiful inevitability of varnish and fuel. A flak Fearling finds its range and strings black puffs along his path. He feels one hit he doesn't see, just a slap under his left wing, a new note in the wind. Counts to 1, to 2, and then feeds in a shallow climb that will not look like retreat. Blue 2, left revetments. Blue 2 scythes low and mean along a row of parked 109s, soil jumping in a dotted seam beneath his rounds, the second airplane in the row blossoming into the kind of orange that smells sweet even above oxygen. Blue 3 takes the tower glass in a disciplined brushstroke, not to kill men, but to kill sightlines. Blue 4, too young by half and exactly as brave, over-controls for a heartbeat when a 20mm puffs too close, then steadies as if an older hand has reached over and set his wrist. A gaggle of ground crew run in a bent-back sprint for a slit trench and never make it because they decide, correctly, that the trench is too far and the shadow of a wing is immediate sanctuary. Reynolds flashes past the dispersal where a 109 is still wearing its gear pins like earrings. He feels the urge to yank for another pass and steps on it. One pass, gents, egress west. He has learned the old ground attack catechism the hard way in a few fast afternoons. The second pass is where bravado meets physics. The second pass is where you die for a photograph. Climb 2000, field to your 6, then weave. A Veerling hammers again. He is already wrong-footing it, already making the gunner's lead feel like a bad guess. On a country road half a mile from the airdrome, an old woman stands with a basket of eggs and watches the silver thing that swooped down and drew a line through her world. She does not know what a Packard Merlin is, or what a Doolittle directive is, or why American fighters have begun to behave like hawks instead of sheepdogs. She does know what fire looks like on a wing. She will tell someone, later, in a kitchen that smells of cabbage, they came for the planes on the ground. They did not go away. Back over 6,000 feet in clean air, Reynolds checks fuel and feels the lift in his ribs that means he has margin for the coast. Blue, count. Voices answer. 2, green. 3, green. 4, green enough. He looks back once, not for targets but to fix the geometry of the place in his head. Hangars, revetments, flak pits, the way the perimeter track kinks around a drainage ditch. Tomorrow, someone will ask him to draw it on a board. He wants the drawing to be true. In England, Captain Hall closes a file on his desk and writes a neat line under the day's interrogations. Multiple prisoners volunteered astonishment at fighter persistence over target. Reports of airfield attacks increasing acute fatigue in Jagdgeschwader ground echelons. He doesn't write the sentence Mertens used in the ward, that the escorts are not reasonable, though he hears it under everything else. He has begun to suspect that reason is losing this war faster than machinery is. The egress to the North Sea is made of numbers again. Altitude, vector, cloud base. A weather front has slouched down over East Anglia like a tired giant. The controller's voices sharpen to the tacks and twine of radar talk. Leiston, steer 085 at Angels 8, descend on my mark. Reynolds rides the mixture lean, keeps the prop a shade fast for authority in the soup, and trusts a man he will never meet talking from a dark room full of scope glow. When the overcast breaks, the coast is there, an ink wash of hedgerows and fields and runways that lead like arrows to home. Wheels down, 3 greens, flaps to 40. The runway unrolls, the Mustang sits to it, tail up then down, tires singing a brief hymn of rubber and relief. On the hard stand, the crew chief counts holes and runs a thumb along a nick on the leading edge as if reading Braille. "You went low," he says, half admiration, half rebuke. "Orders," Reynolds says, and hears how easily his mouth makes the excuse for a decision he wanted to make anyway. In debrief, someone has chalked on the board, "Airfield strafing, report." The room smells of wet wool and burned coffee and the after-ozone of electrical things warming cold air. Reynolds draws Wunstorf's dispersal with a stub of chalk, sheds, a row of revetments, a Veerling here, and the intel officer nods as if the sketch completes a sentence he has been writing for weeks. Claims get tallied, colors of nosebands noted, flak heaviness bracketed. The quiet rumor from the cages filters in by way of an RAF corporal who shouldn't be gossiping and can't help it. One of the Germans said they used to go up after you, and now they sit in their cockpits and wait for the roof to fall in. The room doesn't cheer. Men just look at one another with that pinched, precise relief you see on mechanics when a stubborn engine turns over. Night folds down. The stove in the hut ticks. Reynolds lies awake and sees, not the bombers this time, but the curve of the perimeter track around a German ditch, and the way a 190 caught fire as if flame had been waiting for a chance to show itself. He thinks about how far they went, and about how far there still is to go, and about how the war's math has begun to prefer him. Across the field, in a ward where the windows are shuttered at dusk, Mertens turns his head toward a sound that isn't there and dreams he is climbing into a seam that will always be just out of reach. April 11, 1944, west of Rathenau, 27,000 feet. The sky so clean it looks like it could cut. The bomber stream is a braided river of aluminum and breath. Lieutenant Jack Reeves Reynolds holds his weave above the high right box, the Merlin V1650-7 turning a patient, predatory hum at 2,700 RPM. Two fresh 108-gallon paper tanks ride the slipstream under his wings, their white lacquer nicked and grimy from hands that work in the cold. His kneeboard shows a ribbon that arced north of Magdeburg and now bends toward the east edge of Berlin. Ball bearings, rail yards, the arteries you sever when you mean to make a body stumble. Blue lead, darky control. The voice has that schoolmaster calm again. Build-ups Brandenburg to Oranienburg, Angels 2-6 to 3-1. Expect coordinated head-on, then climbs for the seam. Debden high 3, Bodmy high 9. Reynolds acknowledges with a thumb squeeze on the transmit bar no one hears but him, then taps his gauges. External fuel holds steady. Oil temp where it should be. Oxygen hissing a dry reassurance through the mask. They come as if summoned by the chart. 4 FW190As scratch a head-on across the lead squadron. 20 millimeters walking a dirty zipper through a B-17's number 2. Before the 190s can roll and fall out the bottom clean, a 4th fighter group element drops through in a long, indifferent sieve, silver blades in the sun. One 190 cutting in half as if persuaded rather than shot. From below end to starboard, 2 BF-109 G6s begin that careful ladder up the shoulder of the stream. Reynolds feels it the way a man who's worked a river feels the tug under his boat before a fish shows, miles and minutes equaling an absolute. Blue, tank check. He rides the left paper to a nervous flutter, flips to the right, tastes the arithmetic in the back of his throat. 1 more minute than comfort allows. Mark, jettison. The 108s kick, flare bright, and tumble toward a winter-dead field that will find them useful later. The Mustang straightens as if relieved to be what it was always meant to be, an idea sharpened to a wing. Down and east, braces of black blossom at 26, then 27, then 28, flak handwriting crisp and practiced. The forts open their bomb doors like iron mouths and settle into that unnatural calm a man never quite gets used to. Steady, steady, bombs drifts across VHF in a reverent whisper that would make you cross yourself if you believed in anything but speed and altitude. On the other side of the water, in a low building with whitewashed walls and windows the color of rain, Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Mertens sits at a table with Captain Hall and 2 mugs of tea. The ward in East Anglia has fed him porridge and quiet. The RAF nurse who opens the window a hand's breadth lets in a smell of damp hedgerow. Hall has a folder he does not make a show of opening. It is a kindness Mertens resents and is grateful for. In the hall, a bicycle clicks past on a stone floor. It sounds like peacetime. Hall does not begin with the questions that look like traps. He begins with the sentence that has become a ritual between them. Did you hear them today? He means the Merlins. He always means the Merlins. Today they came earlier and stayed longer. Mertens did hear them. He woke to the distant saw song before the ward bell and lay there, remembering the way an escort line once thinned like a thread in a man's hands, then didn't. "Ja," he says, and watches the Englishman's pencil hover. Back over Brandenburg, Reynolds eases Blue Flight outward into the hunting weave Doolittle authorized and the 8th has learned by muscle memory. There, a pair stepping up in the perfect 2-ship ladder, leader vigilant, wingman with that particular trust that kills him. Reynolds steals 2 degrees of nose low for smash, slides half a wingspan outboard to make the leaders look back wrong, and lets the amber ring of the N9 sight float over the wingman's canopy. Squeeze! The braided note of 6 Brownings turns the 109's wing root inside out. Glycol opens white. The leader yanks for the sun and lives because the new doctrine is iron. Stop the climb, then return to the money. A voice from a different altitude cuts into the net. Matter of fact, not triumphant. Escort still with you over the turn. You can feel the sentence land in 1,000 cockpits, German and American, as a truth that has lost its novelty and become weather. Flak walks into the stream with a professional's cruelty over Oranienburg. A fortress ahead and left, the nose art lost to distance, shivers, slides a half ship out of place, then hauls back in as if someone caught it by the collar. Reynolds drops a wing just enough to put his canopy over the high right quadrant of the box and rides there, a roof. He has learned to be careful with comfort. This new math that favors him has sharp edges. The last time a man relaxed up here, he went home on his own prop wash and didn't arrive. On a Luftwaffe field somewhere west of Berlin, a ground crewman with oil to his elbows hammers a stubborn pin into a 190's gear door and flinches when the sky speaks in a voice he recognizes now. Mustangs diving where no escort had reason to be last winter. The Veerling coughs a black square into air so clean the edges look drawn with a ruler. Men run in that bent-back sprint you see when instinct fights dignity. The calculus of ambush points is changing faster than chalk can be wiped from a briefing board. Escort cleared to sweep on egress, Control says in a tone that could be discussing weather. Airdrome targets authorized within fuel limits. There it is, the hinge pressed flat by use. Reynolds answers, blue copies, holds the roof through the bomb run because the money is the money, then slides the flight into a measured fall. 1,000 feet, then 2, no heroics, wide of the stream's backside to look for the assembly points that used to be safe. A 4th group element crosses to the high 3 and erases a 190 swarm that, 4 months ago, would have had a clean half-minute to turn into wolves. By the time Blue turns west for the sea, the oxygen tastes like tin, and the Merlin sings the less excited note of a machine that thinks home is possible. Blue lead, fuel state. He glances, and the needles answer in good English numbers. Enough to argue with weather, he says, because the controllers have been muttering about a front sliding down like a wet sleeve over East Anglia. At Leiston, the field smells of damp fuel and cut grass. Tires chirp. The tail settles. On dispersal, the crew chief runs a thumb across a black nick on the leading edge and grunts. Found Flak again, he says. Flak found me, Reynolds answers, and they both accept the joke as the prayer it is. Debrief. Chalk. A map with red twine that is starting to look threadbare from use. The intel captain, tweed gone soft with service, writes without ceremony on the board. Berlin, escort complete. Again. He circles it. When the room quiets enough for men to hear their own breathing, he adds, like a man adding a grocery item, ground controllers report fewer coordinated German assemblies. Prisoner statements indicate uncertainty in intercept timing. He doesn't say the sentence they all feel. The enemy's math is failing in front of them. Across the field and a fence and a quiet road, Captain Hall opens his folder and, for the first time, lets Mertens see one page. It is an 8th Air Force loss chart, lines crawling and listing like ships in a swell. There's a bend in the bomber line that corresponds to a month, to a directive, to a shape men in leather jackets make when they lean forward and refuse to turn back. You ask me why we keep asking the same questions, Hall says quietly. It's because the answers change. It's because men like you keep telling us the moment you realized something shifted. Mertens studies the line as if it might be a runway. He thinks of schoolroom geometry, of arcs and vectors and fuel ladders scribbled in pencil on briefing boards that felt like commandments. He hears again the carried hum of Merlins he cannot see from his bed, impossibly far inland, unreasonably present. We used to count, he says, and his English betrays him into plainness. We counted minutes. Your escorts did not obey our minutes. Hall nods and does not smile because victory is not a thing you grin at in front of a man whose life is broken on its wheel. There are other reasons, he says, and means industry, fuel, training pipelines, the thousand dull miracles of logistics. But yes, minutes. He closes the folder as if you were closing a window for the night. That evening, the rumor runs the length of Leaston's mess like a draft under a door. A captured flak officer told a debriefer he watched American fighters circle above Berlin after the bomb run as if they had come to stay, and he felt, for the first time, that his guns were furniture. No one toasts. Men drink coffee that tastes of iron and wool, and look into the middle distance as if watching light change over water. Outside, the rain starts, and then quits, the way English rain does. On the hard stand, two white paper tanks shine in a lantern's hooded glow, already stenciled, already faintly perfumed with glue. A corporal touches one with the back of his knuckles, like a man greeting a dog. In the hut, Reynolds lies on his bunk and hears the stove breathe, and the wind feel for the canvas. In a ward with clean sheets, Mertens closes his eyes and sees contrails spiderweb a sky that once felt like a possession, and now feels like weather. In the dark between them, somewhere above the North Sea, a contrail shreds and is remade by wind. May 12, 1944. Merseburg, Luna, 26,000 feet. A razor of cold lives in the mask, and the sky is scored white where a river of B-17s and B-24s drags its vapor east. Lieutenant Jack Reeves Reynolds, 357th Fighter Group, Blue Flight, holds his weave high right, Packard Merlin V1650-7 turning a restrained predatory 2700 RPM. Under each wing, a fresh 108-gallon paper tank, white lacquer nicked by greasy prints from men who said little at dawn. The kneeboard ribbon curves in pencil from the Zuiderzee to Magdeburg, and then south, a dogleg to the industrial heart, the Luna Work, the biggest synthetic fuel complex in Europe. Kill the fuel, the brief had said, and you kill the wings that carry the black crosses. Blue lead, Darky control. Multiple builds north of Halley, Angels 26 to 3-1. Expect heavy, accurate flak over target. Debden, high 3, Bodney, high 9. The voice carries English turf and church pews into the cockpit, precise as chalk on slate. Reynolds touches the gauges without looking. External left, steady. Oil temp, good. O2, hissing a domestic hush. They show exactly where the map promised. 4 FW190As scythe head-on across the lead group. A B-17G coughs smoke from number 2 and holds. Before the 190s can roll and fall clear, the Debden boys, 4th Fighter Group, tip off the contrails with the guillotine grace Reynolds has learned to recognize at a glance. One Focke-Wulf cleaves into halves that tumble with an obscene elegance, pieces winking in noon sun before flak smoke eats them. Below and ahead, in that edge where contrails make fences and wisdom makes guesses, 2 BF-109 G6s begin the patient ladder up the bomber stream's shoulder. Blue, tank check. Reynolds milks the left paper until the needle flutters, flips the selector, tastes arithmetic at the back of his throat. 1 minute past comfort. Mark, jettison. The tanks kick, flash white, tumble, tomorrow's German stovepipes, and the Mustang shucks a poundage you feel as relief and temptation both. Bomb doors. The words pass along VHF like a liturgy, reverent, intimate. The forts open iron mouths. Below them, the Luna Stack forest. Tanks like coins, pipes like the guts of a titan. The flak that rises to meet the bomb run isn't random anger. It's handwriting from professionals. 88s, 105s, 128s, marching in stepped bursts at 26, then 27, then 28. The intervals crisp as a metronome. Reynolds rides a roof over the crown of a box whose lead bird carries a white triangle A, 1st Bomb Division, and feels the Mustang's wings drink the thin air with feline certainty. Blue 2, tally pair, high 11, stepping. Reynolds slides outward, half a wing, nose 2 degrees low for smash, and lets the N9's amber ring float ahead of the wingman's canopy. Squeeze. 6 Brownings speak a braided thunder. Aluminum peels. A white flower of glycol opens in the 109 slipstream. The leader yegs for sun and lives because doctrine holds, stop the climb, leave the chase, go back to the money. On the ground beyond the smoke, the Luna Yard bosses shout in a language of whistles and frantic arms. A line of tank cars flashes silver, then orange, then a color hotter than thought. In one corner of the complex, a pressure sphere vents in a white geyser that becomes a black tree. Between the stacks, 20mm and 37mm flak chatter like men with machine tools. The forts roll on rails you can't see. Bombs fall in rectangles that become maps. Across the water, an English ward. Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Mertens sits propped on clean sheets, ankle mummied under RAF wool, window prized open a hand's width to let rain and hedgerow smell in. Captain Hall has brought him tea and a folder he doesn't put on the table. You can hear them again today, Hall says, a statement, not a question. Mertens nods. The Merlins left home early and stayed long. You could feel them in bone before ear. We hear them now the way we hear our own trains, Hall says mildly. A timetable of sorts. Mertens thinks of timetables. In Verneuchen and Oldenburg and Wunstorf, the clocks used to command the morning. Escort here, then thin. Bombers vulnerable here. Climb there, strike then. In his mouth, a word that has begun to taste like ash. Früher, before. Over Leuna, the flak handwriting grows spidery with urgency. Steady, steady, bombs, whispers a lead bombardier, and the yards go to geometry and then to ruin. A fortress ahead and left shudders, slides half out of place, then holds, as if a hand has repinned it to the sky. Reynolds watches without blinking. He owes them a roof, not awe. Escort cleared to hunt on egress. Airdrome targets authorized within fuel limits. Control's tone is weather again. Reynolds keys, blue copies. He holds through the bomb burst's cruel calm, then tilts the flight outward on the turn, trading altitude for options. North of the plant, 3 miles from a stand of birch, a Luftwaffe field sits like a diagram. Revetments shaped like scoops. A perimeter track kinked by a drainage ditch. A Fearling pit square as a child's block. It's written on his kneeboard in a hurried pencil hand from a briefing photo that smelled of chemicals. They go down the way learned men do a craft. One pass only. From the long axis, change path on egress. Climb 2,000 before turn. The first blur of ground is a 190 at the hold line. A crew chief's hand flat on the wing. A pilot half-belted, goggles skewed. The amber ring floats a hand's breadth in front of the spinner. Reynolds touches the trigger. The muzzle smoke is invisible at this speed. The effect isn't. The cowling jumps, then caves, varnish and fuel offering themselves up with theatrical eagerness. A flak Veerling hammers a square up the runway. He's already wrong-footing it, angling across the gunner's math. Left revetments. Blue-2's voice is a steel wire. His Mustang yaw checks, then writes a dotted seam along a row of 109s with their gear pins still in. One becomes a bonfire. Another drools glycol and sorrow. Blue-3 flicks a brief, impolite brush across the tower glass, not to kill men but to blind eyes. Blue-4 overcontrols once when a 20mm finds the air near his canopy, then steadies as if an older hand had closed over his. Reynolds levels, then yaws a polite degree and lets the field slide off his 6 as if he's grown suddenly bored with it. One pass, egress west. The catechism keeps you alive. The second pass feeds widows. A farmhouse flashes by. A woman with a basket of eggs has stopped to watch the silver thing that came like a hawk and set men's work on fire. She will tell someone tonight, in a kitchen of cabbage and coal, they went for the planes on the ground. They did not go away. Home is still arithmetic. Blue lead, fuel state. Needles answer in the language of mercy. Enough to argue with English weather, to accept vectors from a voice in a dark room full of phosphor light. Leaston, steer 085, Angels 9, descend on my mark. The North Sea shines like hammered pewter, then like wet slate, then like smell, salt and oil and the ghost of weeds. Wheels down, 3 greens, flaps 40. The runway unrolls under him, tires sing a brief hymn. Tail comes down like a decision. On the hard stand, the crew chief runs a thumb along a new nick in the leading edge and grunts. Field? He asks, already knowing. Wunstorf's cousin, Reynolds says, north of the plant, and the chief snorts a laugh that isn't mirth. In the debrief room, coffee tastes of tin and heat. The intel captain uses stub chalk on a map that's been stabbed by so many pins the Rhineland looks polka-dotted. Report airdrome features in order of approach. Reynolds sketches with a finger on the board's margin. Dispersal bays like cupped hands. Ditch kink, veerling box at the southwest, while a sergeant ticks a column. Claims, air. Claims, ground. Flak heavy, colors and bands. On the far wall, a loss chart for the month has 3 lines: bombers, fighters, enemy. The first line has learned a better slope. Across the fence and a hedgerow, Hall closes his folder on a typewritten memo with a rubber-stamped header. Oil plan, initial results. Your factories are very brave, he says to Mertens. Gentle, a little cruel, because truth is. They keep lighting themselves again. Mertens stares at the blanket seam and says nothing. He's flown past Luna enough times to know what those stacks mean in a country where petrol has become theology. Hall pours more tea. Tell me, he says, as if inviting a friend to recall a song, about your assembly points. Brandenburg, Oranienburg. When do you climb now? Mertens rubs at his ankle with 2 fingers as if he could erase captivity by pressure. When fuel allows, he says finally. The Englishman's pencil pauses so slightly Mertens nearly misses it. How much? Hall asks. What was allotted this week? Mertens inhales, tastes English dust. Enough for once, not enough for twice. And there it is, the sentence that will sit in an analysis as a quiet nail. Not enough for twice. Night in Leiston comes with stove ticks and a damp that sneaks under doors. On the hard stand, 2 white paper tanks rest against a drum, smelling faintly of glue and victory. In the hut, Reynolds stares at the canvas roof and hears, inside memory, the careful handwriting of Flak over Merseburg, the bright cough of a 190 catching fire like lacquer, the radio's liturgy when bomb doors open. He does not feel righteous. He feels tired in the bones, used well, and afraid in the honest way of men who have seen their luck and prefer not to name it. In the ward, Mertens wakes at some hour that belongs to birds and hears the merlins again. So far inland, it should be unreasonable. He thinks of the moment a month ago when he realized mathematics had become weather, and of today when oil turned to flame that tasted of rubber at the back of the throat. He turns his face to the wall and says a prayer no one taught him. June 21st, 1944. West of Stendal, 26,000 feet, noon light, brittle, and exact. The bomber stream angles southeast for rail yards and industrial targets ringing Berlin, Spandau, Erkner, Oranienburg, arteries you bruise to make a body stagger. Lieutenant Jack Reeves Reynolds rides high right above a B-17G box, the Packard Merlin V1650-7 turning a patient 2,700 RPM. Mixture leaned until the engine's note thins to a civilized saw. Under each wing, fresh 108-gallon paper tanks drum their hollow rhythm, white lacquer scuffed by hands that worked in silence at dawn. Blue lead, darky control. The schoolmaster calm again, a voice that makes vectors feel like promises. Build up scattered, Wittenberger to Nauen, Angels 26 to 30. Reports of light fighter opposition. Expect heavy flak.
Reports like that are treacherous. Men die when they expect emptiness. Reynolds taps his gauges. Externals steady. Oil temp sweet. Oxygen hissing, a quiet domestic reassurance. And watches contrails stack like terraces in the thin blue. The first pass is almost perfunctory, as if the Luftwaffe is going through the motions of a ritual no one believes in. 2 FW190As scratch a head-on across the lead ship, hitting nothing but daylight and pride, then roll and try to fall into the seam. Before they can finish the sentence, the Debden boys, 4th Fighter Group, tip off the contrails like a silver guillotine. One 190 coming apart with the obscene grace of metal persuaded to be confetti. The second German overshoots and seems surprised to find Mustangs still there where last winter there would have been air. Blue, tank check. Reynolds milks the left paper to a nervous flutter, flips to the right, tastes arithmetic at the back of his tongue. 1 minute beyond comfort, always one, and then mark, jettison. The 108s kick, flash, tumble. Tomorrow's German stovepipes, leaving the Mustang the shape it means to be when it fights. Below, Berlin's flak handwriting lifts in stepped black. 26, then 27, then 28. Neat, spiteful, professional. Bomb doors comes across VHF in a reverent whisper. Iron mouths open. The fortresses steady into that cruel stillness only discipline can purchase.
In a rail yard near Spandau, a string of cars goes from silver to orange to a color hotter than scents. Beyond, a machine shop exhales glass and dust. Blue 2, high 11, pair stepping. Reynolds slides a handspan outward and 2 degrees of nose low for smash, lets the N9's amber ring float over the wingman's canopy, and squeezes. 6 Brownings speak their braided thunder. The 109 twitches, peels a strip of aluminum, blooms white with glycol, and decides to be a glider. The leader yanks for sun and lives because doctrine is iron. Stop the climb, then return to the money. What's strange is what doesn't come. No dense timed head-ons and relays. No underbelly ladder where 4 months ago the scene would have been a slaughterhouse. Here and there, a pair tests the edge, then fades. You seeing what I'm seeing? Blue 3 asks, voice flat with suspicion. Seeing less than I was promised, Reynolds says, and doesn't let the thought settle. Empty skies kill men who lean back in them. On the other side of water and war, in a ward with whitewashed walls and a window cracked to let June and hedgerow smell in, Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Mertens sits on a bed with his ankle swaddled and a small cardboard suitcase at his feet. Captain Hall stands by the window with a folder open the way a man holds a mirror. You're going inland, Hall says. Not cruel, not kind. A proper camp. Better food than your field kitchens lately, I expect. Mertens nods once. He has learned the taste of understatement. The English way of saying a wound is a scratch, a catastrophe, an inconvenience. Hall turns a page. Today, he says, reports suggest your controllers placed their ambushes and found no one to ambush. He doesn't watch Mertens when he says it. He watches the sky, as if the answer might be written there in contrails. Mertens says nothing for a long breath. Then, fuel, he says, as if the word itself were a wound. Over Oranienburg, the flak is a black orchard. A B-17 low left slides half a ship out of its box with a hitch, then, miracle and muscle, edges back in. Reynolds keeps the roof where it belongs. Escort with you, he says out loud, though the forts can't hear him on interphone. It steadies his hands. It steadies the world.
Rough, but she'll fly.
Blue lead control. Escort cleared to sweep on egress. Assembly points north and west. Light activity with you. Weather voice again, as if authorizing a man to breathe. Reynolds holds through the bomb burst's implacable quiet, then tilts Blue outward on the curve of the turn, trading altitude for options. Down 1,000, now 2, noses just a hair low, no heroics. Northwest of the city, near a drainage ditch that kinks a perimeter track, a Luftwaffe airdrome lies in diagram. Revetted bays like cupped hands, a flak-Vierling pit square as a child's block. He saw it on a briefing photo that smelled of chemicals, sketched it on his kneeboard in a pencil hand smudged with sweat. They go down like craftsmen who know their catechism. One pass along the long axis, change path on egress, climb 2,000 before turn. The first image on the ground is strangely domestic. A bicycle leaned against a drum of benzene, a crewman's cap on a wing root, a mechanic's hand flat on an engine cowl as if quieting a horse. The amber ring floats a palm's width in front of a 190 spinner. The trigger answers. Varnish and fuel take fire with theatrical eagerness. The Vierling coughs a square of black into their path. Reynolds is already wrong-footing it, sliding across the gunner's lead like a dancer refusing a clumsy partner. Left revetments. Blue 2 trues up and writes a dotted seam along a row of 109s that look indecently asleep. One becomes a bonfire, another drools white sorrow. A third hunches and does not quite catch, spared by angle or grace. Blue 3 flicks a curt brush across tower glass to murder sightlines. Blue 4 overcontrols once when a 20mm shows him God and then steadies, older by a year. And still, few interceptors. A distant pair tests a climb and thinks better of it. The air feels like a stage after the actors have left, props still in place, lights hot, cues unheeded. In the ward, Hall closes his folder and studies the man he's been learning for weeks. Before you go, he says, tell me the last thing you believed that turned out to be wrong. Mertens looks at the little suitcase and considers lying. He considers pride and its uses. We believed, he says at last, that your escorts could not be everywhere and always. Today, he lets the sentence die. Leaving things unsaid is its own confession. Hall nods, as if Mertens has repeated a theorem they both knew but needed to hear spoken aloud. On egress, the controllers warn of weather over East Anglia. Cloud base lowering, expect vectors to ILS. A string of letters and numbers that turn the sky into a room with edges you trust. Reynolds checks fuel and finds, with the private relief that grows out of superstition and habit, enough to argue with affront. The North Sea appears first as a smell, then as wet slate, then as hammered pewter broken by white lines where ships write their own slow sentences. Leiston, steer 085, Angels 9. Descend on my mark. The voice in the dark room full of scope glow becomes a shepherd. Reynolds leans the mixture, lets the prop spin a shade fast for authority and cloud, and rides the descent like a man walking downstairs in the dark with one hand on the rail. When the overcast opens, East Anglia is an inkwash of hedgerows, lanes, runways. Wheels down, 3 greens, flaps to 40. The runway rises, fills the world, and then is under him. Tires singing a brief hymn. On the hardstand, the crew chief runs a thumb along a black nick on the leading edge and grunts. Light day for wolves, he says, cautious with any word that sounds like luck. Heavier for furniture, Reynolds answers, meaning revetments and towers and the airdrome geometry they needed into fire. The chief nods without smiling. They'll move the furniture, he says, and you'll go rearrange it. Debrief smells of wool and burned coffee and hot dust from the stove. The intel captain chalks the board with his neat, angry hand. Berlin, escort complete. He doesn't add again, it's implied by the exhaustion in the room. When the claims are tallied and the flak belts walked on the map, he turns to a slimmer board on the side wall. Losses, month bombers line makes a slope a man can live with now. Enemy lists more names than there are pins in the drawer. No one cheers. They listen for the hinge in the day and hear it, not as a shout, but as a click. Across the fence, a lorry idles outside the ward. Mertens laces his boot around the ankle that hurts less than it did. Hall offers a hand, not ceremonious. There's a book cart at the camp, he says. If the librarian is the same man, avoid his poetry recommendations. It is a joke with just enough warmth to be almost un-English. Mertens holds Hall's gaze for a breath and nods. Your minutes, he says, because he has one last word to spend. We could not make them wrong again. Hall doesn't write it down. He doesn't need to. It sits in the room like furniture. Night collects over Leiston with the peculiar haste of English summer, where the day lingers and then vanishes. On the hard stand, 2 white paper tanks rest against a drum, smelling faintly of glue and rain. In the hut, Reynolds hears the stove settle and the wind feel for the canvas. He closes his eyes and sees, not a swarm of fighters, but the odd vacancy of a sky where the ambush points were set and the wolves didn't come. Sometimes absence is the loudest thing. July 19, 1944. North of Brandenburg, 27,000 feet. The summer sky is a hard, rinsed blue, the kind that shows every contrail like chalk on slate. Lieutenant Jack Reeves Reynolds sits high right of a B-17 box with a white triangle A on the tail. 1st Bomb Division again. Berlin's ring of factories and yards again. The long ribbon run whose shape his body now knows better than his bunk. The Packard Merlin V1650-7 hums an even 2700 RPM. Mixture leaned until the note thins to a patient saw. Under his wings, fresh 108-gallon paper tanks drum their hollow promise. The kneeboard ribbon runs Cromer to the Zuiderzee to Rathenau, and then east on a dogleg that feels like a habit. Blue lead darky control, build up scattered, now into Oranienburg, Angels 26 to 3-1. Reports of Sturmgruppen possibly forming southeast. Sturm, he's seen the brief. FW190A-8/R2s with armor and 30mm cannon. Stormtroopers for bomber killing, to be escorted by Bf-109 Begleitjäger. When they appear, they come in tight, slow, and murderous. The counter is simple and difficult. Find them before they settle, break the escort first, scatter the anvil before it drops. On the far side of the war, a barbed wire geometry under a gray English sky. Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Mertens stands in a POW camp compound that smells of tin plates and damp wool. Beyond the wire, a ridge of hedgerow, beyond that, a road where a lorry grinds by like a rumor. The guards wear that peculiar British air of being simultaneously apologetic and in charge. In the library hut, a sign clacks on string. Fiction, non. Captain Hall's handwriting on a card left in Mertens's kit says, with English cruelty disguised as courtesy, "If you insist on poetry, avoid the moderns. They wound." The day's gossip moves along the fence faster than a runner. Fresh arrivals from a crash boat said the same sentence a flak officer had said in May, and men in Berlin's cellars had said in June. They said it like you say a thing your mouth doesn't want to shape. The escorts did not turn. Above Brandenburg, the opening notes are a chorus he can play in his sleep. 2 FW-190As scratch a head-on across the lead box. 20mm walking sparks off a B-17's number 2, then roll to fall under and miss their own timing because a Debden element, 4th group, steps off the contrails with guillotine grace. A 190 comes apart with the obscene elegance of metal persuaded into confetti. On the shoulder of the stream, a careful two-ship ladder of BF-109 G6s steps up for the seam. "Blue, tank check," Reynolds says, and rides the left paper until the needle flutters, then flips to the right and counts one heartbeat too long. "Mark, jettison." The 108's kick, flash, tumble, stovepipes in waiting for a Thuringian field, and the Mustang becomes what it loves to be: light, obliging, unreasonable. "Blue 2, high 11, pair stepping." Reynolds steals 2 degrees of nose low for smash, slides half a wing out to sour the leader's look back, and lets the N9's amber ring float over the wingman's canopy. Squeeze. 6 Brownings braid their thunder. The 109 peels aluminum, blooms glycol white, and resigns from the war to be a glider. Doctrine holds. Stop the climb, leave the chase, go back to the money. "Sturmgruppe, high 1 o'clock." The call knifes the net. There they are. A clump of FW-190s with blunt noses and armor hoods, heavy and implacable, pushing a straight, slow line at the high left box. Their discipline, a kind of bravery. Above them, like beads on a string, the 109 escorts nose in, watchful. Debden is too far to own the first cut. Bodney's blue noses are sliding across to the high 9, but the timing will be close. "Blue, with me," Reynolds says, and the flight tilts as one. He takes the escorts, not the Sturm, because that's how you break the hammer. Unstring the beads, and the club loses its mind. The first 109 sees him late. The second trusts the first and dies for it. Reynolds lays the amber ring a palm's width ahead of the wingman's canopy and gives him a measured burst. The German jitters, breaks formation, and the bead string gaps. Behind them, the Sturm line wobbles, tiny corrections becoming big sins. Blue 2 and Blue 3 slice the edges of the escort knot and then sit high like a lid. Blue 4, still too young by half and exactly brave enough, pays attention to the gap rather than the glory and keeps the seam dirty. The Sturm element tries to hold its slow, armored push and finds math they counted on turning to soup. A 190 keeps coming, proud, stubborn, beautiful in its wrongness. And then a 352nd pair drops through from high 9, blue noses bright as bruises, and unthreads the last discipline the way a needle takes a seam apart. Bomb doors. Over Berlin's rim, iron mouths open. The flak handwriting, 26, then 27, then 28, tries to argue with physics and discipline. In the rail yards west of Spandau, a line of cars go from silver to orange to a color you feel in your teeth. Beyond, an engine shed exhales roof and glass. "Steady, steady, bombs," whispers a man over VHF with all the reverence of a liturgy. Above them, Mustangs scissor in a lattice that looks like a promise kept. In the compound, after roll call, Mertens listens to a new man who speaks with the clipped vowels of Saxony. The man was pulled from a dinghy by an RAF launch 2 days ago, his hair salted gray with sea. He tells the fence a story that tastes of iron. His Stoffel climbed for the seam over Oranienburg, on time, by the book. "We began our ladder, 1, 2, 3, he says, one hand rising and falling like a metronome. And then the escorts did not leave. They were above the bombers when the doors opened. They were above the bombers after the turn. They were... He gropes for a word and arrives at the one Mertens has learned in interrogation. An English word he wishes he didn't know. Unreasonable. Reynolds keeps the roof through the fall, then answers the weather voice permission as if it were a habit. Escort cleared to sweep on egress. Airdrome targets within fuel limits. He tilts blue outward on the turn, bleeding altitude into choices, down 1,000, then 2, and aims for the diagram he drew on his kneeboard with a smudged pencil. A field northwest of Nauen with a perimeter kinked by a ditch. Revetments like cupped hands, a Veerling pit square as a child's block. They go down like craftsmen saying grace. One pass along the long axis. Change path on egress. Climb 2,000 before turns. A 190 at the hold line lurches. A mechanic's hand slaps metal as if scolding a mule. The amber ring floats a palm ahead of the spinner. The trigger answers. Varnish and fuel perform their terrible trick. Blue 2 writes a dotted seam along a row of sleeping 109s. Blue 3 brushes the tower glass to blind eyes. Blue 4 over-controls once when a 20mm shows him God, then steadies, older by a year. The Veerling coughs a square into their path. Reynolds is already wrong-footing it, sliding his geometry across the gunner's math like a dancer refusing a clumsy partner. One pass, he reminds the net, catechism that keeps men breathing. Egress west. And then, as quickly as it came, the day goes quiet. A distant pair tests a climb and doesn't like the taste of it. The sky has the odd vacancy of a stage after the actors have gone home. Props in place, lights hot, cues unheeded. It feels like victory and like the part after victory when you clean the floor. The North Sea arrives at the nose first as smell, then as wet slate, then as hammered pewter stippled by ships writing their own slow sentences. Leaston, steer 085, Angels 9, descend on my mark. The voice in the dark room full of scope glow is a shepherd again. Reynolds leans the mixture, lets the prop spin a hair fast for authority in cloud, and rides the descent with one hand on the rail of habit. Breaks out into hedgerows and lanes and a runway like an arrow pointing to home. Wheels down. 3 greens. Flaps 40. The runway fills the world and then lives under him. Tires sing a brief hymn. On dispersal, the crew chief runs a thumb along a new nick on the leading edge. Sturm today? He asks, as if asking about weather. Tried to be, Reynolds says, and the chief nods like a man who has learned the sound of a machine changing its mind. Across the field, a trailer rattles by piled with dented white cylinders that smell faintly of glue. A corporal shouts to stack them by the fence. Tomorrow, 2 of them will hang under blue lead again. Tomorrow, a mechanic with oil-black hands will thump them home with a mallet's rubber face. In debrief, the board already says Berlin, escort complete, without dates because the chalk would wear out. The intel captain adds today's ornaments. Storm sighted, escorts broken. Airdrome at Nauen hit. Flak heavy at 27, stepped at 28. On a slimmer board, the lost lines make slopes a man can live with. A runner brings in a typed extract from a cage down the coast. Prisoners continue to express astonishment at continuous escort over Berlin. Multiple references to fuel scarcity. Assembly points not consistently manned. The captain doesn't read it aloud. He pins it under a thumbtack like a butterfly. At the camp, after lights out, Mertens lies on a bunk that smells of cedar shavings and bleach and listens to the wind feel for the wire. He can smell summer and the metal of rain. He thinks of a ready room at Verneuchen where someone had said last winter, with a smirk a boy wears before a fall, the Americans cannot hold escort to Berlin. He thinks of a day in March when he rode a parachute down and heard Merlins like a carried rumor. He thinks of June when the ambush points felt like empty churches. He puts his hand on the wool blanket and says, not to God, not to the wire, not even to himself. They did not turn. The sentence lands in the quiet like a nail. Reynolds' hut is warm with stove-tick and men who can't quite make their bodies believe they're on the ground. He lies awake and sees, in the private cinema behind his eyes, 2 images that used to live in separate drawers. Bombay doors opening over Berlin and Mustangs arcing above them on the turn. Once, those images belonged to different days. Now, they rhyme. He thinks of the waist gunner on Miss Beth raising a gloved thumb at a silver shape above his window. of a German officer telling an interrogator that furniture is what his guns had become, of paper tanks clattering into German fields and becoming stovepipes and souvenirs. He doesn't feel triumph so much as a bone-deep fatigue that comes when a long sum finally adds the way it was supposed to. In the morning, the wheel will turn on the briefing wall, the twine will jerk. Maybe it will be Leipzig again, or Merseburg, or the yards at Halle, or someplace with a name his tongue has learned without affection. The rules will be simple and hard. Ride the papers to the flutter, jettison 1 heartbeat late. Stop the climbs, hold the roof, hunt on the turn. 1 pass on the ground, come home if you can. The title of the day will be the same sentence 100 men on both sides now know by heart. German prisoners couldn't believe P-51s escorted bombers all the way to Berlin. By then, it will not be disbelief. It will be memory. September 11th, 1944. Merseburg-Leuna, 27,000 feet. The sky is the hard, rinsed blue of a late summer that refuses to soften. Every contrail a chalk mark that will outlast the men who made it. Lieutenant Jack Reeves Reynolds sits high right of a B-17 box with a white triangle A on the tail. 1st Bomb Division, again. The synthetic fuel complex, again. The longest-running argument of the air war. The Packard Merlin V-1650-7 hums an even 2,700 RPM. Mixture leaned until the note turns to a civilized saw. Under his wings, fresh 108-gallon paper tanks drum their hollow promise. He can smell glue through cold rubber, an absurd domestic detail in a cockpit that's a fistful of winter. Blue lead darky control, the schoolmaster cadence, East Anglia in the wire. Build-ups reported sparse, Dessau to Halle, Angels 26 to 3-1. Sturmgruppen possible but low probability. Expect very heavy, accurate flak over target. Sparse, low probability. Words that make graves when men let them in. Reynolds taps his gauges. External steady. Oil temp sweet. O2 hissing the dry reassurance of a kettle on, but keeps the suspicious angle in his neck that says no day is light. They come the way tired men come, without ceremony. 2 FW190As scratch a head-on across the lead element, 20mm plucking at daylight and pride more than metal. Then roll to fall under and miss their own timing when a Debden section, 4th Fighter Group, tips off the contrails with guillotine grace. The first 190 disassembles with the obscene elegance of metal persuaded to be confetti. The second, seeing the sky empty where old Winters promised safety, keeps diving until he's furniture. Flak's problem, not the escorts. Blue, tank check. Reynolds milts the left paper until the needle flutters and flips the selector with a gloved knuckle. He lets the right tank run 1 heartbeat past comfort and then, mark, jettison. The 108s kick, flash white, tumble, tomorrow's German stovepipes. And the Mustang becomes what it loves, light, obliging, unreasonable. He nudges the throttle to wartime truth and feels 61 inches of manifold pressure turn the prop into a carving tool. Below, the Luna forest of stacks and cylinders draws black handwriting out of the earth. The flak isn't guesswork, it's grammar, stepped at 26, 27, 28, as if a school teacher has paced it with a ruler. Bomb doors, whispers a voice over VHF with liturgical awe. Iron mouths open. The bomber boxes harden into the kind of stillness you only buy with discipline and funerals. High 11, pair stepping. Blue 2's tone is a steel wire. Reynolds slides a hand's breadth outward, dips the nose 2 degrees for smash, lets the N9's amber ring float ahead of the wingman's canopy, and squeezes. 6 Brownings braid their thunder. A strip peels off the 109's wing root. Glycol blooms white. The leader yanks for sun and lives because doctrine is iron. Stop the climb, leave the chase, go back to the money. The flak lifts its voice. A B-17G in the high left element coughs smoke from number 2, slides half a ship out, then muscles back in as if a hand has grabbed her spine. You can see the chin turret twitch in tiny human increments that make the heart hurt. Reynolds trims a breath of nose up to keep the roof even with the crown of the box and tells himself, out loud though no one hears him on interphone, escort with you. It steadies the hands. It steadies the world. On the other side of wire and water, a British camp under a sky that can't decide on sunshine. Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Merton stands at the book cart outside the library hut and runs a finger along battered spines. Someone has chalked fiction and non in a hand too careful to be careless. A guard with a Lancashire burr and a kindness he tries to hide says there's new tea at the mess, and that the librarian can be bullied for Tolstoy if you ask in the tone of a man who thinks he deserves it. The day's gossip threads the fence. A man from Halle, picked out of a dinghy by an RAF launch, his hair salted with North Sea, says their controllers set the ambush triangles and found no one to fill them. Fuel, he says, as if spitting out a pit. Enough for once, not enough for twice. Mertens files the sentence where he files pain he can't change. Back over Luna, the flak handwriting grows frantic, letters thickening into a dark scrawl. Steady, steady. A lead bombardier touches the toggles like sacrament, and the yards go briefly geometric. Rectangles, strings, tidy malice, before the geometry dissolves into the physics of fire. In one quadrant, a pressure sphere vents white, and then becomes a black tree. In another, a string of tank cars goes from silver to orange to a color you feel in your teeth. The forts do not flinch. The escorts do not thin. Blue lead control, escort cleared to sweep on egress. Airdrome targets within fuel limits. Weather voice. Ritual permission. Reynolds copies and keeps the roof through the fall because the money is still falling. Then he tilts Blue outward on the turn, bleeding altitude into choices. Down 1,000, 2, nose a hair low, no heroics. Northwest of the plant, near a kinked ditch that bends a perimeter track like a wonky hinge, sits an airdrome he's sketched on his kneeboard in a smudged pencil hand. Revetments like cupped hands, a Veerling pit square as a child's block, a row of dispersals that always look asleep until they aren't. They go down like men saying grace. One pass along the long axis, change path on egress, climb 2,000 before turns. The first picture on the ground is indecently domestic. A mechanic's cap on a wing root, a bicycle leaned against a drum of benzene, a pilot half-belted with a hand slapping a cowling as if scolding a mule. The amber ring floats a palm ahead of a 190 spinner. Reynolds touches the trigger. Varnish and fuel answer with theatrical eagerness. A Veerling rips a black square through the air. He wrong-foots it by instinct now, sliding out of the gunner's math like a dancer refusing a clumsy partner. Left revetments. Blue 2 trues up and writes a dotted seam along a row of 109s with their gear pins still in. One becomes a bonfire, one drools white sorrow, one hunches and sulks but does not catch. Blue 3 brushes the tower glass, curt, impolite, effective to murder sightlines. Blue 4 yaws too much for one breath when a 20mm shows him God, then steadies as if an older hand has settled on his wrist. On the climb out, Reynolds feels the slap of a fragment under his left wing, a new whistle in the wind somewhere near the gun bay. He counts 1, 2, no vibration that means trouble. He trims a hair right and lets the worry sit in the back of his throat with the taste of rubber and metal. Blue, count, he says, and the answers come. 2 green, 3 green, 4 green enough. Each voice a small, stubborn miracle. The North Sea writes itself ahead of the nose first as smell, then as wet slate, then as hammered pewter scratched by ships too patient to be anything but inevitable. Leiston, steer 085, Angels 9. Descend on my mark. The shepherd in the dark radar room works his calm arithmetic. Reynolds leans the mixture a breath, lets the prop spin a hair fast for authority and weather, and rides the glide like a man walking downstairs in the dark with one hand on a banister he built himself. Wheels down. 3 greens. Flaps to 40. The runway rises to fill the world and then lives under him. Tires sing their brief hymn. On dispersal, the crew chief runs a thumb across the nick on the leading edge and grunts. She'll want some love inboard of the gun, he says, already kneeling to see if the fragment made a home. You keep bringing her back, he adds without looking up. I'll keep making her pretty. Reynolds peels his mask off and tastes air that isn't winter, and for the first time all day he lets the weight climb down off his shoulders. Debrief smells of wool, chalk, and coffee that tastes of tin. The intel captain's hand is neat and furious. Merseburg, escort complete, sits on the board as if it has always been there. He underlines heavy flak stepped 26, 27, 28 and circles claims air, claims ground with a teacher's irritated pride. On the slim loss chart, the bomber line makes a slope a man can live with. A runner pins a typed slip under a thumbtack. Prisoners report assembly points not consistently manned, fuel allotments reduced. No one cheers. Men drink coffee and look at the stove and think about the way geometry became noise and then fire. In the camp, after lights out, Merton sits on a bunk that smells of cedar shavings and bleach and reads 2 pages of an English novel about an unremarkable man in a small town with a bicycle and a dog. The book is not good. Its ordinariness is a mercy. Outside, wind moves the wire like a harp no one asked to hear. Somewhere above that wind, far inland where once it would have been unreasonable, merlins drag their saw-song across night. Mertens closes his eyes and builds an arithmetic he can live with. 1 minute of fuel, then another. 1 climb that fails, then another. 1 runway where the furniture burns. He falls asleep on a sentence in a language he does not own. In the hut at Leiston, the stove ticks, men snore with the shaky fragility of people who have made a bargain with exhaustion. Reynolds stares at the canvas roof and sees the day's 2 truest images. Iron mouths opening over Luna with mustangs still above them. A row of revetments going kaflame like accusations answered. He does not feel triumphant. He feels the bone-deep ache of a long sum that finally adds without cheating. In the morning, the wheel will turn, the twine will jerk. Maybe it will be Halley, or Magdeburg again, or Ruland. Names his tongue knows without affection. The rules will be old and newly true. Ride the papers to the flutter. Jettison 1 heartbeat late. Stop the climbs. Hold the roof. Hunt the turn. 1 pass on the ground. Bring your people home. February 3, 1945. Northwest of Brandenburg, 27,000 feet. Noon hard as glass. The bomber stream is not a river today. It is a sea. B-17s and B-24s in numbers that make the contrails blur into a white ceiling shoulder east toward Berlin. Ministries, rail knots, factories that still pretend to turn. Not in defiance, but in insistence. Lieutenant Jack Reeves Reynolds sits high right of a Triangle A box, the Packard Merlin V1650-7, holding a civilized 2700 RPM. Mixture leaned until the note becomes a patient saw. Under the wings, fresh 108-gallon paper tanks, white lacquer scuffed by hands that didn't say much at dawn. The kneeboard ribbon runs Cromer, Zuiderzee, Rathenau, then a dogleg into the city's hard ring. Blue lead darky control. The schoolmaster's calm rides the SCR 522. Build-up scattered Nowen to Oranienburg, Angels 26 to 31. Reports of jets in the area, likely Brandenburg-Brest or Rechlin. Expect heavy, stepped flak over target. Jets. At briefing, a captain with chalk-dry fingers tapped a circle near Brest and said the new word as if it were a rumor that cut. ME-262. They'll run faster than anything you own. Catch them on takeoff or landing, or don't bother. Reynolds thumbs the tank selector with a gloved knuckle and watches the needles obey. Blue, tank check. Ride the papers to the flutter. External left holds. External right promises minutes. Minutes are breath and choice. Out to starboard, a long silver rake tips off the contrails. The Debden boys, 4th Fighter Group, spreading like good news. Above high 9, a pair flashes blue noses, 352nd, already sliding to a posture that makes climbs into riddles. The first cut is tired, almost ceremonial. 2 FW-190As scratch a head-on across the lead ship. 20 millimeters plucking daylight and pride, but not much metal. Then roll to fall under, and run headlong into a high scythe from Debden that looks like gravity doing a favor. 190 comes apart with the obscene elegance of metal convinced to be confetti. The second dives until he's furniture for flat gunners, not a problem for escorts. Below and to the right, a careful 2-ship ladder of BF-109 G6s steps up for the seam out of habit rather than faith. Blue 2, high 11, pair stepping, Reynolds slides half a wing outward, dips 2 degrees of nose for smash, floats the N9's amber ring ahead of the wingman's canopy. Squeeze. 6 Brownings speak in braided thunder. A strip peels off the 109's wing root. Glycol opens white like a flower you don't water twice. The leader yanks for sun and lives because doctrine is iron. Stop the climb. Leave the chase. Go back to the money. Jets, high 1 o'clock. The call hits the net like ice water. Distant, glinting commas with no contrails, angled and fast, testing the crown and then shearing away. The ME-262 looks wrong and beautiful, the future done in dagger lines. It does not play by old rules. It noses through the high cover, sniffs the bomber ceiling as if smelling luck, and then pours on speed that makes even a willing Merlin feel like a promise you can't quite keep. Do not chase, Reynolds says into his own mask, as much command as prayer. The jets outrun attention except when they're owned by Earth. Takeoff, landing, the fatal minutes of pattern. Blue 4, eyes on the fields, Breest and the satellites. Call anything spooling. The young voice comes back level. Wilco, older by months than the calendar will admit. The flak handwriting lifts black and stepped. 26, 27, 28. Professional as grammar. Bomb doors, someone whispers across VHF with the reverence of a man opening an iron church. Mouths yawn. The big ships settle into that cruel stillness only discipline buys. Over Moabit and Siemensstadt, the light turns the smoke into satin. In the yards at Spandau, strings of cars go from silver to orange to a color you feel in your teeth. The escorts do not thin. Above the boxes, Mustangs scissor a lattice that looks like a promise kept. A jet commits, low, late, wrong. It spears a corner of the stream, touches nothing, then arcs away toward a strip north of the city with the arrogant exhaustion of a sprinter who misheard the bell. Blue 4, tally. The young voice has the steadiness of a man who has been afraid enough times to wear it like a shirt. Single 262, low 2, inbound to Breest, pattern left. Reynolds does the brief's arithmetic without looking. Wind, fuel, angle, the catechism against greed. Blue 2, with 4, Blue 3 with me. Hold the roof 2,000 above the turn, then we'll check the pattern. They keep the roof because the money is still falling. Then, permission like weather, control. Escort cleared to sweep on egress. Airdrome targets authorized within fuel. Reynolds answers, tilts Blue outward on the curve, trades altitude for options, and lets the city slide to his 6 while he looks for a runway drawn on his kneeboard in a smudged pencil hand. Breest's long concrete, a kinked perimeter, revetments like cupped hands, a veerling square as a child's block. Blue 2, call his base. Left downwind, gear, 4 says, voice dry with focus. Under the north light, the jet is a shark in a mill pond. Too fast for the room he has. Blue 2, make him choose, Reynolds says. It is not bravado, it is carpentry. Set a nail, then hit it. 2 slides high over the runway's far end. Harmless, menacing, present. The jet pilot sees the silver cross at the wrong angle and adds a breath of power he can't afford. 4 comes through the numbers low and oblique. Not a shot, just a cut. The German takes the bait, pours on throttle to go around, and the 262 wallows on the far edge of grace because jets stall where props would claw. Blue 2 takes the only honest shot. Brief, exact, a zip across the nose wheel and intake, and the jet shivers, then chooses dirt over dignity. It scythes off the concrete into frozen turf and writes an ugly furrow in Europe's February. The pilot lives because machines sometimes forgive men who err at the right speed. Egress. Catechism. 1 pass on a field is survival, 2 is paperwork and a folded flag. A veerling hammers a black square into air that still smells of rubber and varnish. Reynolds is already wrong-footing it, sliding his math across the gunner's lead like a dancer refusing a clumsy partner. They climb 2,000 before they turn, as if stepping up onto a porch the war built for them. Across water and wire, under a sky the color of pewter, Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Mertens stands in a British camp compound with a tin mug cooling in his hands and listens to a new man tell a story about jets that sounds like a fable with bad morals. They were meant to save us, the Saxon says, eyes on nothing. They needed fuel and airfields and minutes. We had none. Around them, the fence hums in a weak wind. Beyond it, a ridge of hedgerow wears frost like lace. In the library hut, a card with Captain Hall's dry hand still hangs on a string. Fiction. Null. Someone has added, in a prisoner's neat, bitter script, and jets. Back over the country that insists on ending, Reynolds checks fuel and finds, with the quiet relief of men who do not name luck, enough to argue with Winter and Vectors. Leiston, steer 085, Angels 9, descend on my mark. The shepherd in the dark radar room speaks his calm arithmetic. The North Sea writes itself ahead of the nose. Smell, then wet slate, then hammered pewter nicked by ships too patient to be anything but inevitable. He leans the mixture, lets the prop spin a hair fast for authority in cloud, and walks downstairs in the dark with one hand on the rail he built himself. Wheels down. 3 greens. Flaps 40. The runway rises, fills the world, then lives under him. Tires sing their brief hymn. On dispersal, the crew chief runs a thumb along the nick in the leading edge. New, small, black as a period. You went shopping near a strip, he says, half pride, half complaint. Only to look at the furniture, Reynolds answers, and the chief snorts, because the joke's been earned. Debrief is chalk and wool and coffee that tastes of tin. The intel captain writes without ceremony. Berlin, escort complete. Underlines, jet activity, breezed. 1262 damaged on approach. Heavy flak stepped. 26, 27, 28. On the slim board of losses, the bomber line makes a slope men can live with. The enemy line is a jag of names that no one knows how to mourn anymore. A runner pins a typed slip. Prisoners report jet operations disrupted by fuel and airfield harassment. Continuous escort over target. Unreasonable. The word sits on the cork like furniture. That night, the hut breathes in stove ticks and men who sleep as if they've signed a truce with gravity. Reynolds lies awake and sees 2 images that rhyme now instead of argue. Bombay doors opening over Berlin while Mustangs still draw a roof above them. A fast, beautiful jet choosing Earth because men with paper tanks and patience stole his minutes. He does not feel triumphant. He feels like a craftsman at the end of a long day. Used well, edged, dull, ready to sharpen and do it again. In the camp, Mertens reads a page of a dull English novel about a dull English man and feels the mercy of boredom touch him like warm tea. When he blows the candle, he says the sentence he can't stop saying, in a language he does not own and a tone that refuses drama. They did not turn. It lands in the dark like a nail set true. April 25, 1945. East of the Elbe, 26,000 feet. Noonlight, thin as tin. One of the last great streams, B-17s and B-24s broad enough to turn the contrails into a white ceiling, leans southeast for Berlin's ring. The yards at Spandau and Erkner, workshops that still pretend to turn, rail knots feeding a city already gnawing its own bones. Lieutenant Jack Reeves Reynolds sits high right on a triangle A box, his Packard Merlin V1650-7 holding a patient 2700 RPM. Under the wings, fresh 108-gallon paper tanks, white lacquer scuffed by hands that didn't say much at dawn. On the SCR 522, the schoolmaster's voice from East Anglia comes with the calm of a man reviewing sums. Blue lead Darky Control, scattered builds, Nowen to Oranienburg, Angels 26 to 30, jets possible out of Briest and Rechlin. Expect heavy stepped flak over target. Reynolds thumbs the selector, left paper, then right, watching the needles answer in minutes he can feel in his lungs. Out to starboard, the Debden boys, 4th Fighter Group, tip off the contrails like a silver rake. Above High 9, 2 Blue Noses, 352nd, slide into that arrogant posture that makes German climbs go wrong. The first jab is weary ritual. A pair of FW-190As scratch a head-on across the lead ship, 20mm plucking daylight and pride more than metal. Then roll to fall under and miss their own timing when Debden drops a clean, indifferent scythe. 190 comes apart with the obscene elegance of metal persuaded into confetti. The other dives until he's furniture for flak. Blue, tank check. Reynolds milks the left paper to a nervous flutter. flips to the right, counts 1 heartbeat past comfort, then mark, jettison. The 108s kick, flash, tumble. Tomorrow's German stovepipes, and the Mustang becomes what it loves: light, obliging, unreasonable. The sight glass on the N9 is clean where a knuckle rubbed frost away. The amber ring floats like a coin on oil. Below, the flak handwriting is grammar again. 26, then 27, then 28. Neat, hateful, professional. Bomb doors, a man whispers on VHF with the reverence of a priest opening an iron tabernacle. Mouths yawn. The bomber boxes harden into the stillness you only buy with funerals. In the yards west of Spandau, strings of cars go silver, orange, white, then a color you feel in your teeth. A shed exhales roof and glass. A pressure sphere vents and becomes a black tree. The escorts do not thin. Above the iron mouths, Mustangs weave a roof that looks less like courage now than habit. Jets, high one! Distant, glinting commas with no contrails nod through the crown. ME-262s smelling for luck, and then shear away on speed the prop world cannot honor. Do not chase, Reynolds says into his own mask. Blue 4, eyes on the fields. Briest, Rechlin, Oranienburg satellites. The young voice comes back level, older than its calendar. Wilco. They hold the roof through the fall, then the ritual permission. Control, weather calm. Escort cleared to sweep on egress, airdrome targets within fuel limits. Reynolds tilts Blue outward onto the curve, trading altitude for options. Down 1,000, then 2. Nose a hair low, no heroics. Northwest of the city, a perimeter track kinks around a ditch like a hinge. Revetments crouch like cupped hands. A Veerling pit is a black square where a child would draw it. He knows the diagram. It's smudged on his kneeboard in pencil and sweat. Blue 2, high 11, pair stepping. A careful two-ship ladder of BF-109Gs tries the seam out of habit rather than faith. Reynolds steals 2 degrees of nose low, slides half a wing outboard to sour the leader's look back, floats the amber ring a palm ahead of the wingman's canopy, and squeezes. 6 Brownings braid their thunder.
Lieutenant,
Aluminum
maintain present
peels.
course.
Glycol opens white.
Closing in,
The
expedite
leader
your
yanks for
return
sun and lives because doctrine is iron. Stop the climb. Leave the chase. Go back to the money. They go down to the field like men saying grace. 1 pass on the long axis. Change path on egress. Climb 2,000 before turns. The first picture is indecently domestic. A bicycle leaned against a drum of benzene. A cap on a wing root. A pilot half-belted while a mechanic slaps the cowl like a mule. The amber ring floats ahead of a 190 spinner. The trigger answers. Varnish and fuel do their old theatrical trick. A Veerling rips a black square through air that smells of rubber. Reynolds wrong-foots the gunner by instinct now, sliding across the math like a dancer refusing a clumsy partner. Blue 2 writes a dotted seam along sleeping 109s. 1 becomes a bonfire. 1 drools white sorrow. A 3rd hunches and will not quite catch. Blue 3 brushes the tower glass to murder sightlines. Blue 4 over-controls once when a 20mm shows him God, then steadies, older again by a year. Egress. Catechism. They climb back through 6, through 8, into cold where the oxygen tastes like tin and the Merlin sings the less excited note of a machine that believes home is possible. On the net, a voice you want to trust says, controllers report limited intercepts, fuel constraints widespread. No one answers because you don't speak gratitude to the dead. Across water and wire, in a British camp under a sky the color of pewter, Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Mertens stands by the library hut's book cart with a tin mug cooling in his hand. The card still hangs on string. Fiction, Nong. Someone, an English hand, has added a scrap below it. Food drop, Holland, coming days. A guard with a Lancashire burr says it like small weather. The rumor moves down the fence. The big ships will drop bread where once they dropped fire. Mertens thinks of Luna stacks, of rockets fitted under wings that made airplanes fly like wagons, of minutes counted in chalk that stopped obeying. He thinks of the sentence he can't help saying, and wonders what it sounds like when it
Fortress
isn't
crews,
a wound.
They did not turn back.
On the egress,
Not
Reynolds
like we
hears a
thought.
different liturgy. Weather improving over East Anglia. Expect vectors for recovery. Chowhound planning under discussion. Netherlands corridors pending. Bread. The words sit strange in a cockpit that has only ever carried velocity. He glances at fuel. The needles answer in mercy. Leiston, steers 085 Angels 9, the shepherd says from the dark room, voice made of triangles and trust. The North Sea arrives as smell, then wet slate, then hammered pewter nicked by ships too patient to be anything but inevitable. He leans the mixture, lets the prop spin a shade fast for authority in cloud, and walks downstairs in the dark with one hand on a rail his hands have worn smooth. Wheels down, 3 greens, flaps to 40. The runway rises, fills the world, then lives under him. Tires sing their brief hymn. On dispersal, the crew chief runs a thumb across a fresh nick near the gun bay, grunts, and kneels as if praying to aluminum. Furniture again? He asks without turning. The kind that burns, Reynolds says, and peels the mask to taste air that isn't winter. The chief nods. Heard talk of food, he says. Planes full of bread. You lot up top to keep the sky polite. Reynolds lets the notions settle like warmth in cold hands. Debrief is chalk and wool and coffee that tastes of tin. The intel captain writes without ceremony. Berlin, escort complete. Then, as if adding a grocery item, airdrome struck. Jet activity limited. Flak stepped. 26, 27, 28. On the slim loss board, the bomber line makes a slope men can live with. A runner pins a typed slip. Enemy assembly points inconsistently manned. Fuel allotments reduced. Reports of food corridors imminent. Nobody cheers. Men cup mugs and stare at stoves and listen to the silence between shells. The next week is a different arithmetic. The big ships wear Dutch fields under their bellies and open their iron mouths onto sacks with red crosses and flour dust. Operation Chowhound, the officers say. Operation Manna across the water. The corridors are narrow, the rules delicate. The sky must be kept polite. Mustangs still dress the edges like silver manners. Reynolds flies at altitudes that let him see handkerchiefs wave on dikes. He smells bread where he used to smell cordite. On VHF, voices practice a new grammar of restraint. Hold your fire. Wave a wing. Let it pass. May 8, 1945. East Anglia wears bunting like a shy smile. In the Nissen hut, the stove ticks in peacetime. On the board in debrief, a word replaces the map. End. Men read it the way you read a gravestone with your thumb. The chief runs his palm along the Mustang's leading edge as if saying goodbye to a horse. You bringing her back today? He asks. Out of habit, he will have to unlearn. I'm not taking her out, Reynolds says, and the sentence sits between them like furniture no one needs to move. Across the wire, a British sergeant with a clipboard reads from a paper in a voice that can't decide whether to be official or kind. Hostilities in Europe have ceased. The camp is very quiet, the way forests are before snow. Someone laughs wrong and stops. Someone else says a prayer without doctrine. Mertens thinks of contrails over Berlin when his parachute swung, of the hum of Merlins inland where it wasn't reasonable, of flak handwriting he can draw with his eyes closed, of paper tanks clattering into fields to become stovepipes and souvenirs. He thinks of a sentence he has said enough times to wear smooth. He tries it again now that it has nothing left to argue with. They did not turn, he says, and it lands not as a wound, but as a memory. Back at Leiston, Reynolds stands outside under a sky that looks smaller without anger in it. The wind feels for the canvas of the hut, the way it did on nights when he couldn't sleep. He closes his eyes and sees 2 images that used to be strangers and now rhyme. Bombay doors opening over Berlin, while Mustangs still draw a roof above. White sacks falling into Dutch fields, while those same Mustangs keep the air courteous. The math is over, the memory isn't.